everyone will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
But I gotta tell you.
Let's begin.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of
I'm not
America
sure what you said.
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I do not understand what you're
Actually, guys, in that trial, that trial I just did, a guy's phone went off.
All right, so do we have any emergency additions or modifications to our agenda tonight?
We do not.
I'd like a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, that passes. Do we have any public comments? Not yet. All right, so the purpose of tonight's special meeting, this is a special meeting, and we're here to receive and discuss the final report of our 7-11 committee, which was headed up by the esteemed Glenn Fout. And this was formed to study our K-6 school sites, and this is an information item. We're not acting on anything, we're not making any decisions tonight, we're just receiving the information, and we are listening and discussing and asking questions. So we don't want you to think that we're going to make any kind of decisions at this point. So, all right. So, Glenn, well, first of all, are we going to eat cake first?
Well, when it's cut. We have, by the way, can
When
you
we
hold
get
it up?
hungry.
Can you hold it up so at least we can...
Okay.
And at some point, we'll hand these out.
All right. Well, I'm
It's up to you.
by order here.
That's up to you.
All right, so we all want to take an opportunity to thank each of you because you've done way above and beyond anything we expected from our 7-11 committee. You've just been so thoughtful and so careful in your deliberations and considerate of each other and respectful of the community. I just think I can't even begin to say what a fabulous job you all have done. And each of us wants to say that. And I know Gabby's not here yet because she has to work, but I thanked her and we'll be thanking her again also. But,
And Dimitri's maybe coming.
he's maybe coming, okay. And we want to thank, in particular, Glenn. As I said, he was the chairperson of this group. And also Marianne Ratcliffe, who really did an amazing above and beyond job of documenting everything, as you can see from this huge binder that we have. Really good job. So it's just been, an amazing experience for us school board members to watch. I did come to quite a few of the meetings, and of course watch them on YouTube so we could see what happened with each of the meetings, and read voluminous amounts of information. And I just think you guys have done such an incredible job. It just blows my mind. Anyway, so perhaps, and Andy was also our staff administration representative. He's sort of guided everybody, and he helped bring information to everyone. And the thing that I thought was really fun last night, when there was a discussion about how much money it would cost to make space at Matilaha for 6th graders, and Andy, somebody said, well, Andy's always right. Maybe we can get him wrong, but no, he was right again. Congratulations, Andy, on always being right and always being just right on task and doing a fabulous job. And he's a new guy here, so this is great. So, Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I did it.
Wow, that was moving.
As a longtime Rush Limbaugh guy, I say ditto. Kidding.
You're moving to the right or the left?
I think it's difficult to add on to that. Obviously, I was actually part of the subcommittee that read through your applications and helped choose, and we had what people's big question was, how long is it going to be? How many times? We're like, you'll meet 3 or 4 times, and we had no concept of sort of the scale, the depth that you guys would go into. So that was very impressive, and I think it means a lot to us and to the community.
I just say, I never quite know what is the best thing to say until I hear others speak, but just to addend to what Jane said, when I talked with our attorney, who is our expert in the area of procedures that might precede the changing of the use of school property. And he said, well, you know, the 7-Eleven committees around the state, particularly around the LA area, might meet as few as 2 or 3 times. I've seen a few meet as many as 10. So I'm going to send a note, get on our website and count ours. You know. Last night was the 13th, and so we won't count this one because you're eating cake. But in any case, no, it was, you know, you already know how I feel about you because you've seen numerous, I'd say 5 or more, references to the quality of your work that I've sent out to staff, to the board, and as recently as today to the reporter from the Ojai Valley News, who asked me to comment on the report, which I did not, because it's inappropriate for me to do so. It's not even official yet. It will be by the end of the evening. And even then, we have some other things we have to attach to it because there's so much material. But you know how I feel. To me, the quality of research, the quality of questions, the quality of discourse, the level of respect, which I think pretty much every one of you commented upon on March 30th when you were going around the table. You know, 7-4 is a reasonably wide divergence on an issue which was sort of the key issue, if you will, when the whole process began, and certainly in terms of the Ojai Valley News, which, if you remember, the first headline was School Closure Committee coming together, right? Again, and it didn't matter how many times I said wrong title, you know, it was a catchy headline. And by the way, I think both the Ojai Valley News and the Ventura Star did a really first-rate job of covering them. Was very pleased. Very few inaccuracies or misleading statements. But in any case, you know, as you look at the report and as we talk about it, there were various votes and motions, and of course, Marianne, you know, nailed all of them. They're right there in the report. But the key one coming out for some people with whom I've spoken, say, well, how do the 11 members feel about the issue, the big issue of school closure? I said, well, 7 people felt we should retain 5 schools, and 4 felt that either we should have less than 5 schools or that issue should be further explored with the implication that probably less than 5 would be appropriate. But if you read the statements of the 4, I don't think it would be accurate to say that there's perfect harmony among the 4, right? So that even within the 4, there are 4 different views. So the board has a tremendous amount of information with which to deal over the next period of time, and certainly there'll be more. Knowing this board, there will be many more questions, even beyond those that you've asked and answered. I have some, and you know, my role was, I came to every meeting except last night. I figured you probably handled it without me last night. But the others I thought were, you know, pretty interesting, and it's fascinating for me not to be on that side. I've spent most of my life here, so it was pretty interesting to listen as an audience member with an occasional participation point. So you all know how I feel about you individually and certainly collectively, so thank you.
Dimitri, your seat's over here.
Here, Dimitri,
Up in the front.
got your regular nameplate. Here you are.
Yeah. Dimitri. So we're welcoming Dimitri, who is was one of our members of the 7-Eleven committee, and glad that you could make it.
Up there.
Right
Don't sit next to Bob.
Sorry,
Right.
the trolley was late.
Get in the spotlight.
All right, so you have.
I do. I have 2 kind of general impressions. The one, and it's hard to not repeat what's been said, but one is just the thoughtfulness and the diversity of thought that went into each little nuance. You dealt with so much information, and I appreciate, you know, all of the ideas and concepts, and that was really, and the concept of thoughtfulness translated to changing of positions along the way as new information came in. And I thought that was just wonderful to be able to get new information, think about it, consider it as a group, and interpret it and interpret it in many different ways. Which on the one hand is a little difficult for us because there are so many thoughts. On the other hand, it's all great thinking and all great ideas. And so I really appreciate that, and we have so much quality thought. And so the other impression is you did a fantastic job of inspiring the community to get involved and to share their thoughts. And I think that that's really important too. If you're a frequent attender of school board meetings, you know that we don't do nearly as good a job of inspiring the community for them to participate as you do.
I'm not so sure that torches and tar and feathers is actually what they help inspire.
Well,
Not
you
what you're
know,
looking for.
potato, potato. Anyway, I just really appreciate all that you've done, and it gives us a great foundation. And as you know, you've looked back at committee reports in the past years, and I'm quite certain that this will be a document that will be referred to back again many, many times over the course of the future. So, thank you.
I don't want to repeat everything everybody said, although it bears repeating, that we're certainly grateful for the incredible effort. We were just talking here, it's like, I don't think any of us had any clue as to how much time would be required of you or that you would willingly dedicate to this. And for that, I think, personally, I'm supremely grateful. Two things come to mind in terms of what I saw was an extraordinary generosity of time and spirit by the committee members, and an extraordinary level of courage. We talk about courageous conversations at work when we talk about a lot of difficult things, and this could so easily have been just a slide through safe conversations, and you all took it on head on. No one flinched, and were so professional about it, because courageous conversation has to be courageously heard as well as spoken, and that's what I saw, and the activation and the interest in the community that you generated can do nothing but benefit this district. And I could only wish, frankly, maybe not, but I can only wish that we could maintain that level of interest and involvement. And because to see parents come out, whether they agree or disagree, to see them take the time to be involved, which is so critical, and we know that involvement is so critical to the success of our students. If we can continue this in a positive, productive way, it would just be fabulous for us. So I really thank you, mostly for your time, but most of all for your courage. So thank you.
All right, so for Dimitri and Gabby, who just arrived, we're thanking everyone for your work. As you can kind of guess, that's what we're doing. So I'm going to give certificates to each of you now, and then we're going to eat cake. Right, and then Glenn's going to present the final report, his sort of summary of it. All right, so I'm doing this alphabetically. So the first one goes to Andy. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Huh? Oh, okay. The certificate says, the Board of Education extends its most sincere appreciation to Dimitri Corbin for your exemplary commitment and performance as a member of the 2015-16 school year 7-11 committee. So everybody gets one that has their name and the same.
Four of you got exemplary.
And one got chair.
And as I said, our esteemed chair, Glenn. And Linda Jordan. And Melanie Marks. Right. And Steve Phillippi, and Marianne.
One time I would have been proud to sign something as clerk.
All right, and Merv, who is, you know, and Gabriela Vegas. And David White. All right, so I think we have cake in the back.
Kathy, how are we doing on numbers of pieces compared to people in the
I think we have
audience?
enough for the room, and if we don't, I'll keep
If we-
cutting.
All right, so
All right,
for those of you who came, please have one.
have
And
some
those
cake.
watching at home can't.
Rush on down.
Go to your refrigerator.
If you didn't come in person, you're out of luck. All
Let's
right, so.
take a little break.
You guys can, you're first.
So did you follow up and you knew that they covered it, or you just knew that they would cover it?
No, I had Mark follow up because I didn't know. We knew it was Nancy.
So it was Ann Kaplan. You know Ann at all?
I know the name, but I don't.
Well, she reached out to me on email and by the name Ann Rupp, which I guess she's a lawyer. Rupp. There's never a phone number or anything. I emailed her, I thought 3 times, but twice I emailed her saying, please call me, I need to speak to you right away. Didn't call me. Called her, she didn't call me. You know, and then when she finally called me, she's got this sort of attitude, yeah, well, I didn't get any message from you. Now what? Now you can't do this now? And then I found this nicely Leon Webster, but I would not put her in touch with her, so I called Nancy and had her deal with it directly. But I'm like, God, you know, you're asking people to help you out, and then just like you know, when she talked to me, she wasn't like appreciative. She was more like annoyed that I couldn't do it.
Well, I guess by the time Mark and I got through it, you had already handled because we knew it was Nancy, but
Yeah.
we didn't have a phone number for Nancy either.
Yeah.
We just had the email.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, you already said you had an email.
Now, is there like a total, like I'd be really interested in, I mean, I'd like to do it in the future. I would have been happy to do it this time, but you know, I was a Cal guy. Is it, you know, does everyone like, you know, can you do like,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, absolutely. My neighbor always has you know, this team.
yeah. Well, it's funny because then they were saying, you know, Leon's so nice to do it because she's got relatives coming Sunday. She's got this beautiful guest house, so it'll be stylish. But she's like, you know, I've got relatives coming on Sunday, and I said, I think it's going to be, but I figured, you know, you could probably figure out who the guys are and go, this guy's ranked like 785. He's going to be out of there on, you know, he's out of there on Wednesday, trust me.
Right. Unless they're staying for the team.
Yeah, right. I guess it's the team.
Oh, no, they're not doing it.
But it's Saturdays.
No, now they're doing team. Yeah, that's a whole I know.
This part of this experience.
We don't need to say anything. It's all the same thing.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about.
I know. Not what we're talking about back there either, but.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Jane. I didn't know you really went for help me out. I appreciate it. It was crazy because I had no. So I called up the Ojai, and then the guy who answered was Ojai Tennis Club, and he said he told me that Nancy Pearson.
I gotta tell you a lawyer story.
That Nancy Pearson was running it.
Everybody will sit down. We'll continue with our meeting.
Already in existence, just instead of giving me.
So, looks like the cake was a big success, even though there's enough to feed the whole city. Yeah, now you guys at home can come over and help. Okay. Right.
Yeah, but okay, let me find one.
So I don't want to call out names, you guys. Come sit down, please. You can eat cake at your table, that's all right.
Of course, there's so anytime there's
This is the report here.
All right, so the next step is Glenn is going to give us sort of an overview of the committee report. So
Okay,
if you
thank you.
mind.
And,
You do have it, so you don't have to read the whole thing.
yeah, exactly. 7-Eleven.
We have it. I've already read it 3 times, so.
No, I take Hank's advice, which is never read anything that the
Thank you.
board hasn't sitting in front of them as it
Thank
as
you
is.
very much.
Okay.
And in
Glad
fact,
someone's listening.
and a lot of you said what I was going to say too, which is really just, first of all, just to thank the other members of the committee and to really talk about just how really impressed I was with the diversity and the intellect and the inquisitiveness of the committee and their dedication. We've met since October 13 times, and we've had 11 members at almost every
That's right.
single meeting. Absent a illness or a medical emergency, basically, 100% at the table every week. And to me, that's really reflective of a commitment of the committee. So I can't say enough about that. And I know that we've all said it, and we brought flowers for Mary Ann tonight because I have never seen a group secretary work as hard as she was. And I have the proof because I have the emails with it. 10 p.m., 12:30 a.m., 6:30 a.m., and I'm like, did she sleep? The amount of work that she put into thoroughly documenting our work is really, really impressive. And right up until the last moment here, helping us get this by really pulling this report together for us. So all of us owe a collective debt to Mary Ann because she really, really did a terrific job. And I have to say that as you'll read in the report, that we had a diversity of opinion on the committee. And so I would direct your attention to the personal statements that are attached at the end of the report, because those are the things that as a committee we didn't necessarily agree on, but you get an idea of the diversity of the opinions. Perhaps those opinions that are in the personal statements reflect the community at large. I'm not sure that they do in quantity, but certainly in diversity they do, and that gives you some sense for, depending on what direction you choose to go, of what sort of opinions you might hear from the community as well. So I think those things are very important. And then the last thing I'd like to say is one of the members of the public, a Nordhoff teacher who's sitting behind me tonight, came to the public hearing and said, she cautioned us, she said, there's an adage that says, a camel is a horse designed by a committee. And the highest compliment I can give this committee is to say, by gosh, I think we still have a horse.
Yes.
So I'm pretty proud of that work. In the report itself, on the front page is the executive summary, and that kind of lists our motions, the things that we agreed on as a group. And that's not consensus, that's not 100% agreement necessarily on all those, but on that executive summary, those really reflect the motions that we made during our process. Please understand that we were learning about the issue as we were going along. We were also kind of figuring out the process too of how to get there as well. And so sometimes we received additional information and rethought our positions on issues. And I'm going to stop right there, quite frankly, because I think that at this point, unless other committee members want to chime in with a thought, I'll sort of leave it to you to ask us questions or to go through the report on your own. Like I said, I'm hesitant to read a report that you have in front of you.
Thank you so much. And like you said, we have the final report, and the highlighted for the audience, I'll just highlight a couple things. One is that all 5 elementary schools remain open, and that's, of course, that's the committee's recommendation, the main recommendation, and we appreciate all your hard work that went into that. The board would like to ask questions. We're looking at this tonight as kind of a give and take, a dialogue, so that if you have any personal thoughts about how you experienced this process, how you came to your conclusions, maybe how your mind changed. We don't want you to read your statement because we have it here. We just got it tonight, actually, so we haven't had a chance to read everybody's statements. And I know everyone hasn't given their statements yet. But if you have, they're all here? Oh, okay. All right, they are all here. So if you have some things that you feel, how did you, what were your thoughts and your feelings that went into making your decision? So, Dimitri, how about if I start with, or Andy, why don't I start with you? What do you think?
I'll echo what everyone else has already said and what we mentioned on the 30th, which is how much I really did enjoy the experience working with everyone, and appreciate how much we were able to share differing views. And I really came into the process, with no expectation of where I was going to be, leaning toward, being the most recent addition to the school district as well as to this community. I didn't have as much of a legacy or a background with understanding the importance that each of our schools have in this community. And so I would say that, I was one of the votes that changed from at first being in favor of the recommendation to close one of the schools, and ultimately changed to support keeping all 5 open. And a major factor in that was the 2 public comment hearings and being able to really hear from the community and hear just what type of value the classes or the schools have for, in this community. So that was something I really valued.
Oh, yeah, we can ask questions.
Well, that's why I just want to ask how this is going to work, because is it sort of, we hear what that person, we ask that person, because I was at quite a lot of the meetings, and the ones that I didn't attend, I watched. So I'm very aware of where each of them stand, and then also having read their statements. So is this a chance for me to, like, if he says something I want to ask him, or, okay. But and then I have, obviously, like, sometimes if I'm at home watching it, I have a question that wasn't answered. So I have questions that maybe weren't asked. And are we addressing those some tonight, or that's after this section?
I don't see why, if you have a question for Andy or anyone, actually, I think it's a good time to do it. We want to have a dialogue so that everyone has a chance to say what they need to say, that perhaps they didn't have a chance to say, to us as a board, because we all weren't at every meeting. We may have watched it and all that sort of stuff. We attended quite a few, but as a group, we weren't all together, so.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I think I'll stop there. And any questions I'd love to answer.
No, not specifically. I just thought before it gets to something that I was like, wait, can I talk now? Let's set it up beforehand. I didn't want to.
I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
How do you think the Dodgers are doing?
Hoping worse than the Cubs.
Yeah.
Oh, the Dodgers.
You mentioned in your statement that Delinka's estimate of future enrollment was in some way predicated on a 2012 kind of birth bubble.
Exactly.
And now here we are in 2016. I was not aware of that fact, that they had seen at the time of that report this kind of sudden increase in birth rate in 2012 in Ventura, I assume?
No, in Ojai.
In Ojai.
That was the last year they had Ojai birth rates.
Do we have any idea how it's going now?
So the Delinquent Group study looked at a 15-year regression analysis comparing actual OHI rates to the county rates to try to develop a trend. We had 2012 was last year that we actually had actual rates for
Right.
OHI, and after that they had to just go back to that regression and apply it what they had projected out for the county and apply it for OHI based on where our 2012 baseline was. Between 11 and 12, there was a big spike. I want to say it was at least a 40% spike in birth rates in 2012. And so we developed a 15-year trend history, and then because of that one blip, the new entire line moved
Right.
up. And so we since then have had an opportunity to see what 2013 rates look like. And 2013 birth rates are lower than what they projected based on, it's still higher than where we were at 2011, but it is lower than what they projected based on that 2012 bump.
I'm surprised, like 2014, it's pretty real time, obviously, who's born and where they reside. I'm surprised we can't
By
see
the time
data.
the state actually aggregates
Yeah.
it, and it's the Department of Finance that releases that information, they're a few years behind.
So 2013 is the most
2013 is the
current.
most current. That came out in the fall, and they release it each fall is the timeline. So the 2012 birth year is going to become the kindergarten class of 17 or 18, and so that's why we're looking at, as we've talked about, we're anticipating 16, 17 being the final or the bottom of the valley or the bottom of the drop, and then a small uptick in 17, 18 is what Delinquent projected, and that was based off the 2012 single year increase.
Just to give you a little sense of, talk about real time. So I met with the elementary principals this morning, and we looked at projected class sizes in every school for next year, therefore total number of students in each grade. And there's a precipitous drop from this year's sixth grade to next year's kindergarten. I mean, we're looking at, I'll give you round numbers, 225 or so sixth graders leaving the elementary schools, and it probably looks now more like 140 to 155 kindergartners. Now, the 226 is unusually high. I mean, the norm for us is that 180, 85, 90 kind of number, right? Give or take. Actually, technically, I guess it's about 200 because we have 13 grades and, well, plus TK. So 190 plus TK in 13 grades gets you about 2,600 students. But we're on our way down, we know, below 2,500 or so. So the norm would be 180, 85 would be a typical class. So next year's sixth grade is quite large, but the incoming kindergarten, we're hoping, we always get more come August, but we allowed for that. So, it could be 160 maybe, but it also could be in the 140s. So it's a much smaller kindergarten than sixth grade.
Okay. Dimitri, did you have any thoughts about the process and maybe how you made your decision?
Well, I think I did start initially with the first visit with Andy and Glenn, and the requirements of what we were supposed to do were pretty clear. So I thought that just put everybody on the same page. So I felt that was easy. And then coming from my personal view of working with the schools and working with the city and seeing all of those numbers put in charts and things, we all live through those things. So yes, that was very, very clear. And then for me, my mission with Peachtree Theater Company is to reach out to at-risk youth in underserved communities. And OHI is certainly one of those. And all children, I think, are at risk, but especially in our elementary schools. So that is where my focus is in education, because they have to be ready for high school. So looking at that and seeing what is the best need for the student, and then what's the best need for the community. So coming from those, and just having to be the voice of those families that I do teach. So the two big meetings when everybody was there, it was nice to hear those voices, but I heard those voices and I've been an advocate for those voices working in the city and working with the school district. So I just came with what I knew.
Great. Anybody have any questions for Dimitri?
Oh, and I did want to say something, Kevin, with your question as far as the birth rates. You see so many families around it. It was 2012, you just looked and go, gosh, where are all these kids coming from? It was just suddenly a burst of a baby boom, and that may happen in another year or two. There are younger families moving here, and you perhaps may see it again.
Marianne, I know you were trying to be on task all the time, listening to everybody and writing it all down.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for Hank and Kathy and Andy and the phenomenal job that they all did in supporting the work of the committee. It was really a privilege. Appreciate your choosing me. When I worked at the newspapers and people would call, they'd be furious that they didn't get their newspaper. I loved those phone calls. I loved them. I was so happy that they were so mad that we're boiling, and I felt that way at the hearings, the public hearings where so many people came, that they loved their schools. And I so related to them because my experience with my children since their nursery school with Mrs. Eck has been just a wonderful experience. Truly remarkable teachers to the person, and remarkable schools now with my experience at Summit and at Matilda Junior High School. So I felt that come through at that meeting, and I was not happy personally that we were at that situation, but it did serve a positive purpose, and we did have the community come forward and remind us why we care so deeply about our schools. And then I just want to say, when we first met at our very first meeting, we talked about, we wanted to have a school possibilities committee. We didn't want it to be a 7-Eleven or a school closure committee. And that's really how we started out. So we understand 7-Eleven is a check the box procedure that the state requires for you all, then to take the ball and do what you have to do. But for us, it was just an opportunity to brainstorm, and we're so glad that I think we came up with some really good ideas that none of us anticipated coming into this, and learning from each other. And I look forward to seeing what you all do with these ideas, and then of course your own as you expand on them, and then you add yours to the mix. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Any questions for Marianne? Okay, I'm going to skip back and forth because David always, I know, my last name's Taylor, so I was always at the back of the room, alphabetically. So David, you're next.
I sort of like that.
Thanks.
All right. What's the question?
You were waiting, you were
See? You used to be around.
Okay, I can share something. I really appreciated the ability to be on this committee and to have a voice that I think is being heard in the community. I really appreciated the lens it provided for the Resilient Schools program idea to coalesce. I think that resilient schools are the basis of resilient communities. I think that was proven by the response of the Miners Oaks community in particular to the motion to close their school. And I think that resilient communities and community partnerships are key. And when we're looking at the amount of money that can be saved by closing a school versus the amount of money that can be made by making an application to the State Water Quality Control Board for Prop 1 funding, it just doesn't match. I have worked with Food for Thought and OUSD, and we put together an application called a DROPS application, and that is for infrastructural changes for, and I like the wording of integrated solutions for already identified problems to our infrastructure. And the State Water Quality Control Board is particularly interested in capturing rainwater, storing it, and reusing it. And we didn't get our DROPS application. We submitted it, but it was a technical error with our application. But what I did was I lined up a conference call with the committee who basically give that funding out. And Andy was on that, and Josh was on that. And basically, they said to us, we're working together on an application that will be funded. And that's to the tune of $10 million. So when you look at $10 million, 30% of Measure J versus the savings that could come about from closing a school, it's like, I think resilient schools and resilient communities makes a lot more sense. And I encourage the board to follow up on that. The pre-application is due tomorrow. However, our DROPS application is our pre-application. So, and we talked to these people, and basically we're saying, please apply. We had money left over from our drops application. We couldn't give it all out. And so they want to fund us. They like our application, the money is there. And that's where I think the focus needs to be. That's where the framing should be. Resilient schools, resilient communities.
Can you tell me that funding, though? My understanding is it's for, you know, rain barrels and gutters and things to, it's not for teachers to
Right.
teach about rainwater.
Infrastructural changes for stormwater management, capture, infiltration, and reuse. And your community partners who provide the kind of environmental education that can link those to state standards, those are very important too. So you have your infrastructural changes, those are going on, but then you make those tied to educational standards, and then you're empowering your teachers to get out of the traditional classroom. You know, the landscape becomes the learnscape, place-based experiential learning.
Bless you.
Thank you.
So David, there's a lot to read between the lines there. So, one, this school district is in line, you think, credibly, to get $10 million to collect
Yes.
rainwater?
So I suggest contracting Sierra Watershed Progressive, who are currently working at Thatcher and doing their stormwater management up there. And Andy has all the information, and I just suggest asking Andy about it.
And then how, just to be clear, how does this inform the question of, to put it, you know, bluntly, closing a school? Because I know you've talked about the prospect of making Miners Oaks a particularly environmentally oriented school.
already is, yeah.
Right, but is that part of this vision that would somehow involve the $10 million?
Yeah, I think that when you're doing infrastructural changes that you can then tie standards-based education to, then you make an environmental magnet school. And that could be happening. This drops application was not just for one school, it was for 3 schools. I believe it was Topa, Matilaha, and Miners Oaks.
And when you say standards-based, what standards are you referring to?
Educational standards, whatever we're doing now.
Common Core.
Common Core, and then you're just saying you would tie in those types of, you'd, for example, have a math curriculum that might involve some aspect of
Sure. You know, when you look
the
at
collection
as a
of
goal,
water.
for instance, that all the water that's delivered free of charge by rain to your property is kept on the property, then you can calculate the area of your school and the amount of water that is delivered in inches, and then you can multiply that up and find out how many gallons you have delivered free of charge and how you can store that. That's a math problem.
It's what Greg Lapine is doing with environmental field studies. It's very
Right.
similar, hands-on science.
And when you look at the organizations like, you know, the Once Upon a Watershed, which I run out of Oak Grove School, and we are developing a 6th grade curriculum called Our School the Watershed, which is going to be looking at those things theoretically. And I'll have the kids out with sidewalk chalk, drawing stuff on the playground. Here's where you can put an infiltration basin. Here's where we imagine a rainwater tank. You know, here's where your drought-tolerant perennial polyculture goes. Here's where your ephemeral vernal pool is.
But theoretically, I mean, going on what you just asked, we could still be doing that even if a school was closed. I mean, this is not, oh, you're closing a
I
school.
doubt it, you wouldn't be able to do it with kids. There wouldn't be any kids there. But you know, why do you need to close a school if you've got $10 million the State Water Quality Control Board wants to give you, and you can save $232,000 by closing a school? It just doesn't match up. So, you know, I think that the framing, and it came from me, this was what I'm very thankful for being on the committee, is that you know, the idea of framing this resilient schools is a different framing from closing schools. So I mean, I don't see the two going together.
I'm very excited about that program, by the way.
Me too.
Sounded wonderful.
May I chime in for a minute?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just, David mentioned his, how our sorry.
Murph, we understand what you
mean. No, David mentioned partnerships, and I think that one thing that's been highlighted in my mind over the course of the last few months is that what a huge amount of work we have to do as a district to form the partnerships within our own communities first. I think to have a culturally proficient school and a culturally proficient district, we need to do a much better job of outreach within our own communities, letting them know what we have and what we have to offer, and make sure that we're bringing those people in so that we can continue, as Mr. Shanahan mentioned, having those courageous conversations and keeping that level of engagement up. If this is just a blip on the radar where we've gotten community involvement, then we're back to square one in just a few years.
Yeah.
And people will forget quickly. And so I just want to make sure that I know as me as a teacher, I can do more as a teacher, and I think we can do better as a district reaching out to those communities who may not speak English, who may not have the same, may have different avenues of receiving their information. And that I think that when David mentioned partnerships within the nonprofits, I think that really we need to look at partnerships within our own community as well.
So that's something that you felt really came out in this whole process of the 7-Eleven committee?
For me personally, it was I spent a couple hours at Miners Oaks School before one of our 7-Eleven committees, and it was quite obvious that Miners Oaks, the community of Miners Oaks was not as well informed, had serious questions, and were blindsided, so to speak, by the information and the headlines and all that. I think Hank and Andy did a really good job in the last few meetings of making sure the minutes and the agendas at least were translated into Spanish, that notifications were put out there in both English and Spanish, and I think there's a lot of that district-wide that we should look at implementing in order to continue keeping the community involvement and engagement up high.
Thank you. Do you have any other things you want to add about this whole process? This is your turn.
Oh, I didn't mean to jump in line. It is a difficult process. I have a son that goes to Miners Oaks, and I originally voted for the closure of Miners Oaks. I was one of the original. I see it as a teacher. I see it as a leader of the union, as one of the leaders of the union. Being a teacher is very difficult, and also knowing, and you don't get into it. You don't get into it for the money.
Yeah.
You definitely don't. But there is a financial aspect to it, in order to continue retaining, recruiting, and keeping the morale high of teachers is supremely important. And I saw this as an opportunity to become involved. I feel like I've been very involved with within our school communities, taking every opportunity I can to work on different committees or subcommittees at Nordoff or wherever it was. I've been trying to get involved. And you don't see that. And what you don't see, you see the same faces. But I see 114 faces, and many of them, we don't all agree. I'm not going to get consensus between 114 teachers, but you see a lot of teachers whose heads are slumped, who's wondering what's going to happen. And I would make sure that we're not afraid of change. Change is difficult. You're going to hear a lot of opposition to any change or any tough decision, whether it's moving the 6th grade to Matilaha, or whether it's moving the district office from this site to another. Everyone's got a stake in the game. And so in the end, someone's going to lose something they want, or not get what they want. And that comes out of fear. And that comes out in change is hard. People are afraid of change. And we just need to make sure that if we're going to make a change, we thought it out well and are willing to stand by what we believe in.
Morva, I have an issue I want to ask you about, because I know it's in your specific expertise. One of the things you put in your report talking about resources and how we use them in our district, in which you were articulating how you thought consolidation was a good idea. You talked about the differential between special education in Ojai versus the county generally, and I think what you wrote is that Ojai Unified has 16 to 17% of its students receiving special education, while the county average is 10%. And then you said that that's an indication of not enough intervention or differentiation being applied before students qualify for special education. Could you speak more to that?
I think when you've got large class sizes are not a direct indicator to student performance. the biggest indicator of student performance is having an amazing teacher in front of that classroom. An amazing teacher can teach 35, 36, even in 5th or 6th grade, 4th grade. It's doable. But when you do it year after year after year, you put those high class sizes, what it limits is really that personalized education, the ability to connect with every single one of your students. So I think what we've seen is that after years and years of having high class sizes, that we haven't been able to connect to every single student. We haven't been able to provide direct, specific, targeted interventions to students who may have needed them. And so what happens, they fall behind in 1 year, and then next year they fall a little bit further behind. And what you see is the rest of the 3rd grade class moves on to 4th grade, and that other student just keeps falling further and further behind because the needs aren't addressed until the time that they qualify for special education, which is the most expensive intervention that we can apply. It's got the class sizes are capped very low. The level of support and classified support that special education classes have is very high. The workload, and everything involved in special education is the most expensive. It should be the last intervention applied. And I'm not saying that. I don't have proof that because we have such a high special education population within this district that we haven't done our job correctly. But I have a tough time believing that because we have more kids with specific learning disabilities in this district just because they grew up in the Ojai Valley. To me, there's got to be a gap. I can't say for proof that I know that that's what's the case, but being in education, having a wife who's been in special education, having a brother with autism, knowing what goes on, and having a pretty good feel for education, I believe that all plays parts into having somewhere in the 16-17% student body identified as needing special education.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I picked up in the discussion the principals had one of our meetings regarding some of the benefits of consolidation. And I thought I remember hearing that one of the benefits of consolidation, having more units at every grade level, is that it allows for a heightened intervention because students can't be moved into where it's most advantageous, where you're limited to 1 or 2 classes. There's no place to move that child. But if you have more teachers at any given level, then that consolidation can actually improve your early intervention and maybe drop this very expensive component over time. That's what I heard.
Well, Merv, I would like to, having, spoken to some teachers and visited some classrooms, there is a big difference between having a class of 20 students and 2 sort of out of control, squirrely kids, and having 29 students and having 5 or 6 that are out of control. Because if you have 2, from what I've heard from teachers, is that it's easier to sort of keep them within the group than when you have more than 2.
Well, if you're talking about, there's a differentiation between squirrely kids and kids with identified special needs.
But aren't you saying that as they progress, they become special needs because they're not getting the attention that's bringing them into?
No, I don't think every squirrely kid needs special education. But there are specific needs within, let's take phonemic awareness, where the rest of the class is progressing at grade level in a class of 29 kids. And having squirrely kids makes it extremely difficult, especially if you've got more than 2. Because you're putting out fires everywhere. But those aren't the kids. The squirrely kids aren't necessarily the ones who qualify for special education. The kids who fall behind in reading and foundational math skills, or any one of the other areas that you need, the organizational skills, the adaptive skills that teachers can teach, that are teachable skills. And cognitive skills are not ones, but teaching the organizational skills, teaching the prioritizing skills, teaching the how to get started on the assignments are all skills that we can teach. If you've got 29 students in a class, I'm not sure you can apply that same level of intervention on each kid as they need it. But as Chris was saying, if you have grade sizes at a school somewhere 95 or 100 or 80 or something like that, you have 3 classes. Let's say you had 3 classes with 80 students in it. One class, one teacher may be really good at phonemic awareness. And so she could say, oh, you know what? These 7 students, these 7 to 8 students really need help or need help on that skill. The teacher can take that. That leaves 73 students between the rest of them. Maybe we've got a really good teacher who can do something else, but she can take 36 for just an hour or 45 minutes to do a lesson because they're all at the same level. And you kind of got that mid-range gap right there where you can, a teacher might say, you know what, these kids just need a little bit extra attention, so we'll take 24 of them. So you take that 7, the 24, and the 37, that's 80 students, and you can really reconfigure how you do it with just 3 teachers at a grade level. It's really much more difficult to do that when you only have 1 teacher per grade, or if you've got teachers with multiple combinations per grade. And so...
those are important things to know. That's really important for us in our deliberations.
But just speaking to the question of class size, for example, and I know you guys had tons of information, but it doesn't seem to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem that we ever did like a pro forma. If we close this school, this is what it will look like. This is how all the classes will stack up. This is how we're going to establish smaller classes, for example. That we don't have that, right?
Right.
That information's not available.
We had a vague hypothetical.
But it was a hypothetical.
We didn't get that specific.
And I don't think there was ever any indication that closing a school would result in smaller or larger classes.
Right.
Well, I think that we did talk about some of the cost of certain items that you could have those savings go toward.
Yeah.
We talked about salary enhancements. We also talked about new teachers.
Yeah.
New teachers would be lowering class sizes.
But new teachers is 3 teachers district-wide.
Right.
I mean, so what is that lower a class size by? Yeah, 1 student.
And presumably we have the capacity, and I know we have lots of sophisticated people in our district already. You know, we use, I know, a lot of part-time work. We do breakouts with some of the classes. So I assume that these kinds of ideas are already being implemented to some degree. I mean, I assume if certain kids are being found to not necessarily be able to keep up with a certain group, that they're breaking them out into smaller groups. I know that happens, at least it has happened in Etopa.
I had the privilege of shadowing Kathy White when I was working for my master's, and can you remember what it's called, the RR Marathon?
Oh, we have a student study marathon where we look at each child individually that's struggling and determine what would best meet their needs.
And so I know that happens. I know that happens at some places. So her teachers, she hires an extra teacher, and she sits down with each one of her grade level teams, and they discuss every single student who didn't make benchmark grades. And then they say, well, this student has made up the progress, so we don't need to have that computer-based program, or this student would benefit from audiobooks, and she has several interventions running at Miramonte Elementary School. And I don't have the experience to know what happens at every single elementary school, but I know it does go on in some form. I have to believe that it goes on in some form.
And Hank, have we ever tried, or is it even remotely feasible to consider intra-district, doing intra-district what is being described as could occur at a school?
No. In other words, if a group of students would be identified in 2nd grade as having the kind of challenges that Merv's talking about, to say, okay, you're in, I won't use names, you're in X school, why don't you consider going to Y school, right, to have those needs identified? Number one, I think we'd have 5% takers, okay, because that would not be a logical thing for a parent to respond positively to, because if I were a parent, I'd say, well, just do it at my school, right, which in fact we do. Okay, so picking up what Merv said, I think the end of your monologue was spot on. That taking that number, I'll go through all the numbers again, but if you have 80 kids and you have a mean of 26, 27 among the 3, you don't have to have 3 if you had this larger group of students in a grade in a school. You don't have to have 2 26s and a 27. Right? You can have, as you were saying, a 20, a 25, and a 30, something like that, or actually be a little more than that. So you can differentiate. Number one, you can differentiate class size. in the last piece of what you were talking about, which picks up on what Kevin was asking about, the fact is that all schools have the program that you're talking about. Now, it may not be implemented exactly the same as it is at Miramani, where the identification per student occurs, but in terms of the district commitment to enhancing the opportunity of the teachers and the principal to address specific needs of students, that's exactly what that $175,000 line item has been used for in the last 4 years. Okay, so the hourly assignment of mostly certificated people rather than classified, and many retired certificated people, absolutely reduces the adult to student numbers, the student to adult numbers throughout the district, and it's implemented really 5 different ways. And I haven't intruded, nor has Marilyn Smith intruded, in the ability of the principals and the teachers to get at the issue. In fact, that was really a lot of what our conversation was about this morning. I was talking about with the principals, and come the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at the confluence of projected class size with about 80 less elementary students next year, A. B, that program, the hourly program, which has been 150 to 175, whether or not the program will be retained, but it may not be retained at that amount, right? Because if we keep teachers with 80 less kids, you need somewhat less intervention in that program. And the third spoke, if that's the right term, the third piece of the puzzle is dollars we have available for all other things, most significantly staff compensation. Okay? So it's an intertwined puzzle.
If I could add one thing here, you've got your plaques, we've had the cake. I think it's unfortunate that you're breaking up.
Oh, you mean meetings number 14 through 18?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm kind of kidding, but I think the importance of continuing the depth of conversation on some of these issues is really important, because you did a fantastic job of diving really deep into some issues, and then there were other issues that came up out of those discussions, but we haven't really gotten to those. So we got to, okay, well, the consensus is we don't want to close this school, we don't want to close that school, we don't want to close that school. But we were considering it negative. We weren't so much considering the positives of some of these ideas. What do we do? If we were able to consolidate kids into a grade and do some of these things, is there a way we could do it without closing schools, with being creative? I know if you move kids from one place to another, there are traffic, there's transportation, there are other issues, but are we looking at all the positives and all the negatives? Because the community comes out on negatives, right? And wouldn't it be great if we could have a conversation about the positives and the negatives and say, I know you don't like this, but what is the trade-off? And what can we offer if we do this or this or this? And there are just so many topics like that. And it's, kudos to all you put in so much time and great time. But I think there are some of these issues about getting kids together to do these things. Where do we move things? It's kind of like the musical chairs, where you go around and around and then you have to stop. And I think some of those issues there were so many considerations about, well, if we close a school, we can move all these other facilities over there. But then we decide we're not going to close the school, but then we still think it's a good idea to move all those things over there, but now there's no room.
Move them somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think it's important, and that's one thing that I found encouraging about the decisions that were made was, I look at, over the past 5 years, the very first 7-Eleven committee that looked at here, some great ideas, and yet, once they were written down, that's where they remained. And then the 6th grade committee, the same thing. Man, when we sat in those meetings, we were all like, I want that middle school, right? But we weren't able to produce it, so it to date remains on paper. So this committee, same thing, some great ideas, resilience is this great idea, some great ideas, but what will become of them if we don't keep churning that pot?
Can I speak to what Thane was trying, is it okay if I jump in? Okay, thank you. What you said, Thane, our work is not done. It's not. And I think that the committee has done a really great job in sort of deploying, is that the word? Motivating the community. And I think now is a great time now we're calling you Dr. David White, right? All the public commentary was Dr. David White, but David has the beginnings of what I would consider solutions that don't involve closing, moving, families commuting, all of that. Our work is not done, and I think this is when really the community can show up in a big way and start really, what's the word, is it deploy? Working towards employing these ideas. And, we really look to you guys with so much respect because we know that you're going to be making really the tough decisions. But I would say, please, know that now is a great time to look at, Murph mentioned change. I know from my 20 years in sales, nobody likes change. 98% of human beings resist change, even when they know it's for the better. So here's the dealio. Why not make the change sort of, what did you say, the report on possibilities, right? So why not make the change? Cool things like a magnet school. I know that's not the best word because it has weird connotations, but Miners Oaks is geographically situated right behind the meadows. It's a mile or less from the river preserve. It is it's like a jewel of awesomeness. The property is just waiting to be repurposed. I do want to say, if I have a moment, I'm going to embarrass Hank. Because I got to say that I learned more from this guy in the last year. I watched this committee and how amazing they were, but I watched especially Hank because he gently brought us along in a way that even though he knew everything, he didn't make us feel like, you should know this. Also, his response in a diplomatic way to negative commentary, I learned a ton from you, Mr. Crane. So thank you for who you are.
I got to tell you, of all a long time, if I got embarrassed that way in my lifetime, I would have had a much happier life as a superintendent. Because a lot of times, the person says, "I want to tell you about Hank." Anyway, thank you. I'll just say thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you, and you're welcome.
Learned a lot by watching
You put the smile in Chicago politics.
Thank you.
But not the shy.
Even though I never lived in Chicago. I was close, but not Chicago.
Suburbs.
Suburbs.
It was,
It was the suburbs.
it was awesome to watch.
Thank you very much.
I think what Michael said earlier about the courageous conversations, thank you for noticing that, because we really did have some courageous conversations. I know right where those came from. The lady to my right asked us to poke and prod each other on a regular basis. Not you! Asked us to poke and prod, and we did it in a nice, kinder, gentler fashion. It was really, like I said, a privilege. And also, during this entire time, I had the privilege of walking all the sites with the principals and doing a little bit of secondary stuff, side stuff. And I will tell you guys what, when I write, in my opinion, that each property is unique, I know you're all familiar with the properties, but I just think that they all cry for a need for one another. They really do. And I'm saying this in a super lame way. Ultimately, I look at environmental field studies, and as an aside, Zoe, my daughter, who used to sit right there, is coming back this summer, and she's doing an internship with Greg Lapine because her major is environmental field studies and sustainability. And she, because of this capstone course, the CTE pathway that Greg has created through an awesome grant from the Ventura County of Education, is that correct? Because of that, it's opening up opportunities for kids on the campus at Nordhoff. Why not look at, okay, great, so we've got this pathway. Why not a pathway from Miners Oaks to Nordhoff? where these kids are going to be that much more wise and equipped to step into these new incredible career opportunities. I mean, I look at the possibilities. I seriously believe, and my default is enthusiasm, you guys have probably already noticed that, but I seriously believe that this is something that can turn around in a very short time because of grants, because of some of the other ideas that are in here. And I really would say that one of the things that I would look at doing immediately is pricing behaviors that you want to see, pricing behaviors that are going to benefit the school district in a revenue generating fashion, such as the reduced fee application, as well as the Saturday schools and recapturing ADA. Just a lot of things that would make an immediate difference if we just did them in a programmatic way. So thank you for really who you guys are, because I know it's going to be a courageous discussion amongst you.
Well, I have an immediate response to that, which is, that's awesome, and I know you're a doer. Sort of apropos of what Thane said before, and everyone said, we conduct a lot of what we do in the school board among ourselves in an empty room. And I don't hold myself out as different. Before I was on the school board, I wasn't sitting in the school board meetings every day. But that said, I think some of the things you guys have identified, they're not, we're all going to sit here and say those are great ideas, but we're not going to run them. So someone, for example, the Saturday school, I wish and hope someone will take that on, because that's a given that would be a way for us to recapture revenue. And I don't think that is going to, the board is not going to be in a position to do that.
But every school does do Saturday schools. I've been involved in them. I've helped volunteer, and that's the problem. They take volunteers who don't come. They take teachers willing to work on a Saturday morning. So it's a great idea, but it's happening right now, and that hasn't changed how much money we're earning. It's helping a little bit.
Yeah, we were talking about.
And we have committee members. Charlie Hancock has explored this. She has some, fabulous ideas that she thought of as listening to our committee and how it could be more revenue for the district by doing more with Saturdays.
My point is just, and I think, again, you're another doer, and I see all these doers who are sitting here in the room, but the point is that we often are approached by people, the drive-by advocates, who say, do this, fix that, how dare some committee decide to close the school? It's like, well, it's not what's happening, read about it a little bit. But what I'm saying is that these things all need drivers. And one, I guess from the bottom of my heart, appreciate my wife is a driver too, So we need drivers. But the idea without an attached driver will just sit on the shelf.
Well, Kevin, I think you are the driver, so I agree exactly what you're saying, Jane, is that we do have Saturday schools, and it's a great program, and Glenn did the math with Charlie, and it was a good amount of money. You did the math at the meeting, $55 per student, how many times you do a Saturday school, and how many schools there are, how many kids are absent. It's 125 a day or something like that, if we could capture some of those. So in my mind, the driver of that is the school board could ask the administrators to say, find out from your principals how often they're doing it, do they think they could be doing it more, and how could we support them in finding the teachers to have more Saturday schools, and know more about what the rules are regarding Saturday schools. So I see that you have that.
I think it could be resourced by the people in this room. They're pretty committed.
Well, they're already doing it, but if it were done in a more, the word that you used was programmatic, or in a fashion where it was stated as a goal, and then people responded to that goal.
Does anybody have any questions? Any of our board members have any questions for Linda before we move on to Mary Ann? All right, Mary Ann, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to follow up on that conversation. I mean, we one of our strengths is that we are diverse schools, and we all do different things amazingly well, whatever the talents are of those particular teachers or those administrators. But I think that there is a role that can come from, and it probably does, is something that and in fact, I know it does. But if we were to take some of these ideas and identify some of the revenue enhancing suggestions that we have and talk about implementing them at a district-wide level across the schools, I think we could see some more revenues come from what we are already experiencing. And one of those I feel very strongly about talking a little bit with Linda and brainstorming with Andy is the potential, and I don't know what it is, but I believe that there is more potential for the school district to get increased LCFF funding through the English learners, low socioeconomic, foster, and homeless youth. And so the idea that I talked about in the report was having, I mean, like you could really literally just make it very detailed and say you have classroom captains, you have this form that's put out, you have all of the ideas to make sure that every single family in Ohio Unified School District has an opt-in and an opt-out box. So it's not just left up to a school principal to advocate, to encourage their parents to fill it out like the principals at our schools do, but there's actually a program with actual administrator responsible and accountable for every single one of those forms, opt-in or opt-out, checked off, just like there are for emergency contact forms, etc.
Any questions for Mary Ann?
Yes, I have one.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your letter maximizing district of choice and inter-district. So I heard a lot of talk about that, and I know you make great efforts up at Summit for the Santa Paula. Were you guys also talking about maximizing within the district or just from outside? Trying to get more kids from outside?
The money is from outside.
Okay. I'm just checking on that because I always confuse intra and inter.
Well, what about
the money's from inside too? If you look at
homeschool,
homeschool or private schools, potential private school students going to coming over to a public school, that's the same amount of money, right?
Okay.
Glenn, do you want to have anything else you want to add, or you?
Clearly it's a complicated issue, and I appreciate saying what you said, that yeah, we could have continued on, and we were sort of getting a little bit of encouragement to finish before spring break. But we are, we're sort of figuring out that process as we were going along, and so we've sort of bundled it together in this nice report, and we're giving it, handing it off. But clearly, there's still a lot of issues to talk about and a lot of ideas to explore. I would hope that everything is on the table still, including consolidation, because I heard a lot of positive things about consolidation, and I agree that I don't think we did as good a job perhaps as we could have to, and maybe this now becomes the board responsibility to discuss the positive outcomes of consolidation as well. I'll remind everybody that we've had school closure in Ojai. This used to be an elementary school right on this campus, and that was closed many years ago, back in the 70s, I think. And so
we still kept the yard.
And so, yeah. So as upsetting as it is,
board member something.
As upsetting as it is, I do believe that there's benefits. I don't think that's the only answer. So I don't think that the idea of the 7-Eleven committee is to come up with a single solution to this problem. But I would hope that every avenue is open, and I would hope that we could go back to the last 7-Eleven committee recommendation and really truly look at relocating and starting to make movement here. The city's in need of affordable housing property. We have teachers that are compensated at the lowest end of the pay scale, and if we could sweeten the pot somehow by working cooperatively and getting some affordable housing for teachers in Ojai, maybe that would make the low salaries more attractive. We know that we're not in a crisis now, but we're looking ahead to this retirement bubble coming up, and how will we recruit great teachers at that point when we're paying less than everybody, and not 5,000 less, but 20,000 less, I think is what Merv said, 20,000 plus less between us and just in Ventura, and that gets beyond sort of quality of life. I mean, that's really compelling, and it's not our fault. but it's a reality that that's the case right now, and so whatever we can do to sweeten the pot. I think the committee was majority agreement that the work should start by really seriously going back to that last report and seeing what does it look like, how can we relocate the operations that are here outside, to Nordhoff or to some other location.
Just so you guys know, when the city identified potential sites for affordable housing, we did include this part of the property out here, the non-building site areas as in the city overlay as a potential area. So it's already been kind of rezoned a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
However they designate it. But so it could become, affordable housing.
So can I just offer one point of clarification about that? So there's 20 different school districts in Ventura County, and there's 20 different salary schedules in Ventura County. Some of the higher ones, they're on the high end, there is quite a gap, upwards of $20,000. But there is not every district pays $20,000 more than our district. There is quite a range, just to make sure that that's quite clear, that I'm not saying that, or I'm not advocating that every school district pays, we're falling short by $20,000.
Typically, if on those higher ones, is it $20,000 to start, and then each year when you get your raise, they stay at $20,000?
It's actually, the gap is smaller at the very first year. At the first year with the base salary and 30 units, with a BA plus 30 units, it's a much smaller gap. The gap grows
as you go along the schedule.
I think by my memory serves correctly, a BA plus 60 or an MA plus 60 at step 10, the gap widens quite a bit. I think we're 13 to 14% below the median at that point, and the gap between us and the highest is quite substantial.
I think we briefly talked about it, but we do have some benefits we offer that might make up for a little bit of the salary.
And that's actually in the chart, right? So we were working with the teachers union, Andy and I, Merv, Angie, in a group to absolutely agree on what the chart looks like with and then you say the cost of benefits included. And one of the things we're working on is, from what perspective do you identify the cost? Is it the district cost, or is it the amount of money that the individual teacher realizes as a result of that particular benefit? However, here what we can say pretty certainly is that on a strict salary basis, at a 20 or 20th or 19th or whatever the year might be, and whatever the part of the salary schedule might be, when you add in the others, it gets better, but we're not talking about anywhere near the median, or mean or median. So we don't go from 20 to 10, we might go from 20 to 17, okay? And the gap when our teachers and we also know, doing what we call a scattergram, many of you have done scattergrams, people who work in your organization. I've seen a lot of scattergrams, okay? Ours is about as bottom right-hand heavy as any I've ever seen, which means we have a tremendous number of veteran teachers in years 16 plus, and they've worked hard in their career to get to the right-hand column, which means many hours past the bachelor's degree with a master's degree. So you put those two together, and we have a whole group, way over 50% of our teachers down in that corner, right? So that our average salary is misleading. Because I guarantee you, there aren't any other districts out there, or if there are very few that have that concentration in the bottom right-hand corner. So what you really need to do is do what Merv is talking about, where you look at various points on the salary schedule and measure that.
So just to be clear, when you're looking at those points on the salary schedule
on the salary,
and adding in the benefits,
right,
we're about 17.
What would you realize right, if you were working in these other districts? And basically where we're coming to is, I would say, an average of about 10 to 13% difference. Is that fair from that schedule?
Fair.
Okay. So in other words, if you're realizing, including benefits, let's say your salary is $60,000. With benefits it's 75. I'm just sort of rounding off. Okay. So if it's 75 here, you would add 10 to 15%, 14%, something like that. Various points on the salary schedule at the midpoint of the other 19 districts. Right. So that's $10,000. Well, actually, it's more than that. It's more like $11,000 or $12,000 more at the midpoint. Now, you might be able to find those districts, the Wainimis of the world, okay, Wainimi Elementary, which is just stratospheric, or Oxnard High School, which is close to stratospheric. And now you're talking about $20,000 plus difference. But ours, compared to the median, is typically in that $10,000 to $13,000, 10 to 13% difference including benefits. And our benefits are very good, right? We're in the upper quartile or so, right? We're above the median in terms of what the person realizes as a teacher and what the district contributes. But even with that, it moderates the difference in salary, but it doesn't come close to getting us to the median.
And we're still one of the few that
Just can I
offers the
stop?
post-employment.
Gabby, was there anything you wanted us to hear from you before you leave?
Take it out so fast.
Sorry, good call.
I know, you have time.
Good job, good job.
Well, actually, I did have my ideas about, it would be a good idea to, how do you say, put more schools together, just because I believe that there's a lot of potential for a better academically preparation for kids. I don't really know how percentage of the kids in Ojai really graduate from high school and then go out in the world, and then they have to be very competitive. I think we have a very good district. I do believe that there's a lot of potential for more. I was thinking about it earlier, but and then I think we have to, how do you say, take the advantage of the momentum of all the community really being aware of the situation, to really include everybody and they can participate and let them know exactly how they can help, or how each of us can help in order to improve any of the revenue for the district, or how can we, or what can we do about keeping our schools in good condition, or just to be part of the decisions or the ideas, because I never seen so many people participating in anything by one time or another. And I was always trying to participate with my kids from the beginning, and there's only 2 times, and this is the second time that I see so many parents involved or participating. So if we use that momentum, and then I think it will be a very good idea to just keep everybody informed, and maybe we'll receive some better answers from everybody, from the community, because this affects everybody and then the future of our community. Because at the end, there's a lot of kids coming. I have a granddaughter now.
Thank you.
I'm taking my part, I think so I think that's all.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for allowing me to be part of this committee, and I learn a lot. I think that's everything for me is a learning experience, and I think I always try to be part of the community. I'm pro-education, so it's very contradictory to be in a foreclosure committee. But, thank you everybody for all
Gabby?
the help and all the information. Yes.
So you are in favor of closing a school?
I was in favor of closing. I did change my opinion. That I think there's a lot of possibilities, and then either I think there's a lot of programs, and I think one of the biggest idea that everybody has is that closing a school will be losing teachers or losing programs available, but I think all the programs are available in different schools. So, I don't know, I forgot the word, so honestly, like combining classes or consolidating, thank you. Sometimes it's not as bad idea, but I think if we can really identify the kids who have problems learning at a very early age, then it will be easier to deal with them through the whole school years. So yes, I did change my opinion, because I think I see different points of view from the people who participate on the meeting, the big meeting.
Thank you so much for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's
Sorry, but I have to go.
I think that's important, and I think that's one of the things the committee that I noticed when I was watching is, you don't just close the school to close the school, or because enrollment is down a little. There has to be, and I think that's the work that isn't done. Why would you do that? Here's why. That's maybe some good things, or like she was saying, here's some, but if we just go on that idea, it doesn't make sense. We have to have a purpose for it. At this point, I haven't seen the purpose, but I think that it certainly could be developed. I don't know yet.
Melanie, you have comments?
That's a good segue, that was
Yeah.
your theme.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Because I was the daughter of a teacher, and I certainly know that they can be paid more. So that's a very important upside that I think if we could achieve something like that, that we could specifically demonstrate, then you've shown the community a true value. I just don't think we've demonstrated that necessarily. And I just brought to the committee my own personal experience as a parent of 4 kids, all who attended and one still attending San Antonio. I'm very personally fond of that school, but I sort of brought the perspective of a parent and how they feel about, how any parent feels about their particular school, and how invested we become in our kids' education, how important that is to us, and how we make those decisions as a parent. Not looking at numbers and who gets paid what and how much enrollment is, and even maybe class size, because class size can be, a large class can be good for some kids and not for others. So that specifically affects every child, can affect every child differently. So I just brought to the committee my own sense of personal impression of the district as a whole being a really wonderful place for all kids. It has immense choices. It meets a lot of different parents' needs. I loved when the minors' parents were talking about walking to school. I just thought that was so impactful for me, because it was not something I'd ever really thought about, because of course I drive my kids to school. I don't live close to San Antonio. So it just brought home the personal nature of education and how each parent specifically addresses that so differently. And I have 4 kids, so not only do I address it differently as a parent, I address it differently with each of my children. So I do want to make one comment about consolidation, because I actually spoke with people about this. One of my children would benefit greatly from being in a school with, say, 4 fourth grade classes, and he happens to be advanced. So, right, I saw the potential of good in that idea for one of my children, because right now he hasn't been able to capitalize on that, on being advanced. I'm talking about one of my older children now, so it's a little bit late, but I'm saying I could see the upside in that idea for one of my kids. I saw that, oh gosh, what if you could take all these different kids at a particular school and meet this person's need on a really high level, and possibly other children's needs that maybe weren't as advanced. So that's just another upside that we might be able to better communicate to parents. So I guess that's really all. I just came at this with an understanding of how parents would feel, how a parent would feel about their school being closed, how parents feel about their children's education, and so in many ways it was very personal for me. Not in the sense that I tried to make it personal with people, but I came at it from a personal perspective. I wasn't even put my kids in public school originally, moved to Ojai and was like, oh, these schools are amazing. I can put my kids in these schools. These schools aren't like Oxnard schools, and it's those very differences that appealed to me personally, and knowing many parents in the district, I think appealed to parents across the board, and so that's kind of what I brought.
Do those differences, in your view, depend on a choice of multiple schools as it currently exists?
I personally think so. I personally think something Linda said was very good. We're not redundant, right? Every school, I think that's a beautiful statement. There's no redundancy. Every school offers something. And again, as a parent of 4 kids, I wanted the consistency, so I stayed at one school. But I do have a particular student who might fit better somewhere else. So I'm aware of that idea too, the idea that a different school could meet a particular child's need. If that makes sense.
So, Melanie, you had a your opinion really changed like 3 times, which I thought was really cool, right? From your, here's, that where you said, item number A, item number, right? You had one opinion. And I was actually surprised by the committee. This is a little aside. I hadn't anticipated that the committee would vote, shall we keep Topo open? Shall we keep some? I thought it was just sort of, we have 5, some combination of 4 might be better, or 3 or 2 or whatever the committee, or 5 like you came up with. So what do you think it was that specifically that made you sort of kind of go, oh, when you look at it, if you just say, we have 5, it's probably too many for this number, it should be 4, like if you were creating it from scratch, but once you sort of, what made you, then you changed a little, and then you changed sort of a little further?
My overall opinion was sort of like, based only on the numbers, because we are low down enrollment, and Miners Oaks is one of our least enrolled schools, or has the lowest enrollment, and a lot of inter-district transfers going out of the area to other schools.
But I thought Summit had the least.
You mean of the large schools, of the 3 large schools?
Yeah, of the large schools. And so looking at the numbers, I made this argument. That seemed to make sense to me, because when we did the hypotheticals, that was the only, closing one of the big schools, one of either Miramonte or Miners Oaks, was the only option that distributed students then equitably through the other campuses. So on the numbers, that's why I leaned toward Miners Oaks. But personally, I kept saying in my statement, I still personally don't see that we've demonstrated enough of an upside
Right.
to
You
do
did say
that.
that's
So I kept kind of going back to that. And then when I heard the personal statements, I was like, well, now I see why, this particular school has value. So I don't know, does that make sense?
No, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
As I'm listening to this and thinking while I'm listening to everybody, our schools really are, they each offer something unique, like you said. And it's a shame that all our kids can't go to all our schools. But
Now, that's one option we did not.
Look, you missed the whole.
Just drive around.
You missed the whole thing there.
Keep the gas companies in business.
But I was thinking,
Light rail in town.
there are some things. We'll get more trolleys. The one thing I was thinking is the environmental elements that David, you talked about so much. As long as we have you here, this is, I'm just thinking out loud, but it's a shame that all the students can't really get immersed in that. What have you found, what grade levels benefit the most from it? I know that every child at every age can learn something, but is there a sweet spot in being able to help them embrace?
David Sobel has a great book called Beyond Ecophobia, and his approach to education and connecting kids to nature is that they have to love it before they heal it. And so much of the curriculum that's environmental for the younger grades is save the pandas, or save the apes or the rainforest. And at that point, you need to have children making fairy houses in the garden, not trying to save rainforest, which we are screwing up. So at the younger grades, they need to connect with nature, and I can tell you that with my first and second graders, which I teach at all the schools and gardens, and when they are sieving compost and finding critters in the compost, they are engaged and invigorated, and they are learning that soil is alive. You don't need to teach them that. It's full of animals, and kids love animals. So even if it's just a pill bug. So at that level, connecting to nature with K1, 2, make them love things and then when you get to, that book, it's a short read, but I highly recommend it, Beyond Ecophobia. You go on to your slightly older grades, and then, the boys want to make huts, the girls want to make huts, you want to make huts. It's not save the whales, it's let's make huts. And when
Make
you've got
what?
when you've got a place like the huts, is my accent confusing?
Huts? Huts?
But
Make
then
huts?
when you go out on the Ojai Meadows Preserve, which is directly adjacent to Miners Oaks and Nordal and Oak Grove, you can do that sort of thing. So I deal with elementary grades, and the Once Upon a Watershed program, which is active in 11 schools that I run. That's right now 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. But we now have a book that's been put together by a local artist, which is a kindergarten, 1st grade thing. Come to Earth Day at Oak Grove and we'll sell you one. But working with, to work with with Greg Lapine's class and to be giving them insight as to the environmental effects of their choices, of their food choices. That's really valuable work. That's important stuff as our population reaches 8 billion,
David, you spoke to doing resilient schools across the district.
Yeah, resilient schools is not just one school. It just so happens that the programs that we have at Miners Oaks are the most mature, and that's the school that's getting visitors from across the globe to see what we're doing. And people are really appreciating the quality of education that is happening there. Environmental education is what all colleges now are offering, cutting-edge programs in this. So let's let this blossom in schools. And this empowering teachers to teach in the outdoors is not something that's just about one school, but it's obviously very nice when you've got a 58-acre preserve right beside your school that you can walk out into through a school gate. That's pretty valuable.
And I want to point out as well that there's 190 kids that live in Miners Oaks that go to other schools in Ojai, that go to the other elementary schools. And so to the extent that we might be able to create a focus at Miners Oaks and make Miners Oaks a more attractive campus for the kids who already, even the kids who just live in the neighborhood, that would bolster that school. If we had enrollment district boundaries, and I'm not recommending that, but if we did, Miners Oaks would naturally be the largest school in Ojai.
Yeah.
And one of your components was the education center to train teachers who could be employed.
And so, community partnerships is one of the things about resilient schools, and I have submitted a grant to the EPA for a Resilient Schools Teach the Teacher program. Thank you very much to Andy for a great letter of support. I got 8 letters of support for that. And it's a very competitive program, but this is the sort of thing that community partnerships bring to OUSD. It doesn't cost you anything. I raised all the money to fund that grant. I had a team work on it. EPA grants are onerous, and I'm fully expecting not to get it because it's so competitive. But we got the application in, the numbers look good, we got great letters of support, and those sort of things cement the community partnerships that we already have with OVLC, for instance, with Oak Grove School. So community partnerships, it's so important. The things that Food for Thought bring to your school district, the thing that Once Upon a Watershed bring to your school district, just those are two groups that I work with. There's many other groups that are bringing things that are enriching the experience of your schools.
Yeah, just to support that, I just think it's important to know who your audience is, right? Know who you're trying to serve. You're trying to serve the kids, but also the parents. The parents are the ones that choose the schools. So you really, I think it's important to bolster them and make them appealing in every way possible to the community of Ojai's parents, if that makes sense. And I think the environmental resiliency is really specifically, I think it's just a great draw for Ojai community.
Especially for a community like this.
Yes,
where we have the
right.
national parks around us.
Right.
And yet it's an interesting, sorry, I cut you
I was
off.
going to move on to Steve, but you have
Well, I was just going to say, I've found as I followed this, and I'll call it a debate, so many issues have percolated up that arguably aren't all that relevant to the question of whether you're going to close a school. The things you've talked about aren't necessarily relevant to that, but I think that they intuitively are relevant to anyone who's been listening to the conversation, because what this conversation has sort of become about is what are our schools about, and who are the people that are driving what makes and I think we all agree, Ojai School's exceptional. You know, so when you look at statistics, we don't come across great. I mean, I think our statistics show that we're an average school in the state of California. At least we're an average school test-wise in the county of Ventura. But I think all of us who send our kids to these schools say we don't see it like that.
Yeah.
It's not like that. But you know, so many things have come up. You know, it's interesting. The whole Miners Oaks being a school with 50% Hispanic kids, and how did it get like that? Is that a bad thing? It reflects a kind of choice that's going on. Is there anything that we can do or should do differently? Someone mentioned, should we not allow intra-district transfer? My understanding is that legally we're obligated to offer it. We couldn't not. We couldn't cease that offering. So anyway, I'm talking out loud and thinking out loud, but I've really, you know, I know a lot of you personally. I respect all of your opinions, and I'll tell you, you know, the thing that the elephant in the room, if not an elephant, but the thing that's like, I'll call it the giant hawk sitting up on the tree, is the money part. You know, the idea that we, you know, would love to do things, but how much is it going to cost? This whole conversation, let's be honest, has been driven by the idea of how can we save money in this district that has little money, and should we be saving money by doing something differently with our facilities? That said, revenue comes from kids.
Yes. It's interesting because I actually felt the opposite. I felt that was not, or I didn't want it to be the reason that we had this conversation, because for me, what was more important is what was happening in the classroom. Some of the scores that I was feeling are not representative of our community. And why aren't they? If we all feel like they're great schools, and when my kids were there, I could tell anybody, you know, I didn't go to private school because I felt this was the best school for my kids. Even though I probably could have afforded a private school at some point. I mean, I did, you know, at a later point. That wasn't, it was not the numbers and the financial savings for me that would made me hopeful that this group was looking at this. It was, are we providing the best education? Is our current configuration providing the best education for these students that we can offer? And my feeling was, it can't be, because I've met these teachers. I mean, these teachers and administration, they're passionate about it, and they are amazing people. So how is it that we can't seem to bring that up? There's something else going on. Now, maybe it's not a solution that is our, you know, maybe it's, you know, the demographics of the world, and the, you know, parents now have to work 2 jobs, and so they're not able to spend the time with their children, so they're putting them in front of the TV. That has nothing to do with us. You know, we can't solve the problem unless we do KIPP Academy and we keep our kids in school till 7 p.m. Well, then you start talking about money.
Well, Jay, I just want to jump in. We are kind of, we have to go back to who we are. We are Ojai. And if you talk to our people who run the district, they'll talk about teaching to the whole child. I hate that term. I don't really quite get my head around it, except it just means that you're not focusing on the test. So for instance, Santa Clara Elementary School District between Santa Paula and Fillmore has scores through the roof that we would all love to have. But they are very much focused to teaching to that test as part of who they are. I don't think that Ojai puts the same level of importance on those test scores as other school districts might.
And thank goodness, I wouldn't want that, but I just mean in the sense of, you know, the percentage of students at Nordhoff that are choosing to go to college. You know, I think it's I don't think everyone should go to college. I think people should, and I love these initiatives that are coming out of the community college district. I love what Greg Lapine is doing. And I think there should be more of that, because I just don't feel like everybody doesn't want to sit in the classroom and get a BA. There should be more opportunities that excite them. But there are children who are excited about going to college and getting a BA and wanting that experience. And unfortunately, the number at Nordhoff that are choosing that are small. And that's why you do have some parents that are choosing private schools at the high school instead, because they want to make sure that their child is going to go to college.
Have we looked into why that is? Is it
Well, I
ours
think
lower than others?
Well,
And
that's a different conversation.
Yeah,
but-
I mean, the answer to that is essentially no. Frankly, because, and, you know, Mike lives this life, but I'll just say compared to two other states I know well, the choices made by some very good students at the end of 11th grade into 12th grade, I'll just speak to New York and Illinois, they would pretty much, not they, there's a group in there, say 10 to 20%, who if you could just hypothetically take them and put them in California, in New York and Illinois, they would go to a 4-year school. In California, they go to a 2-year school, and then maybe go to a 4-year school. Because the choices of junior colleges or community colleges, they're called both, in those other two states are pitiful compared to California, okay? Now, the fact is that, you know, we're now at pretty much of a stasis point at the high school where we have 30 to 35% over the last number of graduating classes who go directly to a 4-year school. 45 to 55%, depending on the year, go into a 2-year school, and about 5 to 10% not either one. We also have a little higher percentage of that 50% or so who go to 2-year schools, who then go to a 4-year school than the norm, but the norm is horrible. I mean, the norm in the county is about 20%, like you and I talked about that. So 20%, I mean, it's not anybody's fault, it's just 1/5 of the kids who go to junior college go to 4-year school. We think, and I don't have perfect stats on this, but we think ours is closer to 30%, okay? So if you take 30% of 50% and add it to 33%, half of our kids go to 4-year school somewhere, at some point, okay? That's the norm. Now, it's not Conejo, but it's also not fill in the blank, okay? So it's about the median. About the median, there is not a high percentage of students coming out of public high schools, I'll just speak in the county, whatever I think a high might be, 60, 70, that just doesn't happen. That's not what happens in the county. So we're about a third, if you say about a third plus another 15, 20% eventual. That's about who we are, and that's not unlike the county.
But isn't that driven more by cost?
Well, the first part is. So I know, because when I walk around the quad over there, I say, what are you going to do? Okay, so like it's, I don't know, January of senior year. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to Ventura Community College, or I'm going to Santa Barbara, and then I'm going to a 4-year school. Like the sentence never ends with, I'm going to that community college, but I know all of them don't. And you're right, certainly since 2008-9, over the last number of years, the group at the cusp, who in 2005 probably would have gone to a 4-year school, went to a 2-year school to save money for 2 years, and then did go on. There absolutely is more of that now, okay? But hypothetically, if we didn't have an economic downturn from 2009 to 2013, we would not be looking at 50% of our kids going to a 4-year school. We just wouldn't. Okay, it's the demographics. It's the demographics everywhere in the county, Ojai, the state, suburbs, not suburbs, urban centers. So much of it is driven, not entirely, but so much of it is driven by what did your parents do, okay? And so if you look at the demographics of the education levels, that is post-high school, actually it's more often interesting the mother than the father, but let's just take both for now. That is the single greatest determinant of what the child is likely to do, plus a little. Okay, it tends to be up, but it's not up by 20%. So if you have a 25% attendance rate at a 4-year school, say graduating among parents, if it's 25, you're not going to have 60% of the kids. You might have 35, something like that. So that's the truth. That's what happens.
And the cost of college is daunting.
Hey, I am so glad I'm done by 20 years.
It's daunting.
It is gone, and as people's incomes have stayed stable, the costs have gone crazy through the roof, okay? So the percentage of your available income to spend on 1 year of college, even a public university in your own state, but now you take a look at it's like crazy.
Well, I don't know what the answer is. Go ahead, Linda.
Here's a plug for Nora. If it weren't for Avid and Sarah Escobar and all that she does, Zoe wouldn't be at college.
Yeah.
She wouldn't be there.
There you
So, you know, Nordhoff does fill in those gaps with all
The
of
AVID
these-
program is unbelievably successful,
Yes.
unbelievably successful.
So just to Jane's question, then how do we gauge if we're doing the job that we need to be doing? Is it the test scores? Is it college entrance? How is it these new tests that are coming out?
Maybe the percentages that Merv was talking about. I don't know.
Which one?
The special ed, the interventions.
Well,
or-
interesting, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we have really great data that's almost done now for this year, where we, for the first time, had some money to put in intervention programs, and we definitely had a decrease in staffings for special education during the school year compared to previous years. District-wide, significant drop in every school except one. So, I agree, I actually agree with everything he said. That class size is a determinant, lack of intervention programs, although we have some, Merv and I talked about this, pretty good range of intervention programs at the high school level. They're various types, but K through 8 less so, okay? And I think over a period of time, 5+ years, we keep these intervention programs, I do think 2020 plus, that 17% will be driven down into the 12 to 14% range.
And I think we have an amazing special ed program.
Oh, well, people
At the
do
elementary
come.
level, I don't know a lot about the upper
They
level.
will find
but-
you. If you're good, they will find you.
Wait.
And I know we've crunched a lot of numbers, but one of the things that we did is that we asked ourselves this question, outside of the numbers, what is the ideal learning environment for our kids? What is the best we can do outside of the numbers? So maybe you take the question of closing a school, which is the thing we all want to avoid, I suppose, to some extent. If you just take that out of the equation, we still hear that 3 to 4 sections per grade, 25 to 28 kids per grade per classroom seems like it's a better environment than our current 1 class per grade, 1.5. Lizzie went through Miners Oaks, and it was always the 1.5. It seemed like of every section in her particular grade. So were you going to be in a combo, or were you going to be in the single standalone class? And so, to me, that was compelling. That to learn that principals supported having 3 to 4 sections per grade, and Hank said that was really kind of an ideal also, and it's just an ideal that we can't achieve under the current. It's only happened once. So
We've had one grade in one school where we had 3 discrete classes that I can recall in 7 years. We had we had 330s at Topa last year, and that's it. So.
But my son, who's 21, when we went to Topa, every
Well, that's because they had 500.
there were
plus
4
kids.
third-grade
Plus-
teachers, there was 3 fourth-grade teachers, because we were bigger back then.
And the class sizes the overall class sizes were smaller in general.
So we're going to move on to Steve. It's his turn now. So I'm reading your report here. Very interesting.
There have been a number of kind words this evening about the diversity of opinions on the committee and how well we all got along in spite of that. I would have to say mine was probably one of the most diverse opinions on the committee.
Yes, I can see that.
It comes in part from my background, which is business and aerospace and commercial information technology and that kind of thing. But in my defense, I have to say my wife was a junior high and high school computer science teacher for 15 years before she retired. And she, in fact, went to school right in this facility. She can't remember which classroom she was last in. But as I approached this, I took what is standard for me, a very analytical approach to the problem. Some would say cold-blooded, but everyone was too polite to say that on the committee. And I appreciate that. But I was struck by a number of things that I think are global within the district kind of problems that you as a school board face. We have space right now in our elementary schools for 2,000 students, and we have 1,300, and as Hank mentioned, it's going to be closer to 1,200 next year. How do we square that? We know that we don't have enough Measure J funds, let's call it upgrade and repair kinds of funds, to fix everything. We have about a third of what we need, frankly. But so can we reduce the facilities that we're trying to maintain to get closer to the point where we can give all the kids and the staff facilities that are in the condition that we would like all of our children to be able to go to school in. The fact is, we can't, no matter what we do, almost. My first suggestion was let's call it serious consolidation. And Hank agreed that the money that is set aside for Measure J would cover 2 large schools. And it would bring those schools up to the point where they would be schools that we would all be proud of. Not that we aren't proud of our schools, but we don't have to worry about the paint peeling on the walls or the the roof leaking or things of that sort. So that was one aspect of it. The second aspect was, as Merv and others have pointed out, that our school teachers are relatively seriously underpaid here in Ojai. You look at our average and the big bump of senior teachers that we have right now skews the salary kinds of questions as we compare ourselves to the rest of the county. And that bubble is both a blessing and a potential future curse. My second biggest concern, besides making sure that the facilities that our kids are going to be educated in are up to the standards that we would want, is that we need to be able to retain good young teachers and recruit good young teachers in the years ahead, when so much of the population of this senior teacher bubble is retiring. And in the meantime, a part of that retaining good teachers is getting the senior teachers to do some mentoring of their more junior comrades in the overall teaching staff. Okay, so I said, well, let's get down to where we have the facilities that we can afford to make what we think they ought to be, and reap the benefits of the consolidation that would allow us the collaboration, the flexibility, and all the things that you heard about tonight that would make it a positive for going to parents and saying, this is what we plan to do with your school facility. And please be clear, and especially for all the folks that are watching on television, no discussion that we ever had of consolidation had the effect of reducing the number of teachers or reducing the number of principals in the school district. So it would likely have a modest effect, if you will, on the average size of a classroom. And I think it was very important to all the members of the committee that we retain all of our principals and that we retain, as best we can, all of our teachers, and that we be able to recruit the best of the new teachers that come along as retirements create openings in the teaching staff. So that was my approach to things. And having had 2 kids go through school, and my wife part of her time being in this facility, I understand the feelings of attachment that anyone will naturally have to the school where their child attends, because there's good as well as not so good sometimes in every school. But that was my approach to things, is to try to make it a business case for creating the best elementary school facilities for all of the students. And I voted for the final report, not because I agreed with all of it, but because it is reflective of the consensus of the committee. And I have to say, we all inherently agreed from the very outset that we would disagree without being disagreeable. And it worked very well. Very well. And again, thank you to Hank and particularly to Andy for overwhelming us with data. Because it made us think about a lot of things that we either didn't know before or had a feeling about but didn't have any data to back up. And so you have our deliberations, and now you have the hard decisions to make.
So I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
You know, the initial basis of all of this was how do we maximize our Measure J money? Right? That was the initial question, is the initial reason why people were brought together. The fact that we're surfacing so many other ideas.
We called it surplus property, but it was more than that.
Yeah, the impetus of this is we've got the $30-some-odd million to spend, and we want to spend it in the right places. So, of necessity, what I'm hearing is that, yeah, we would save some money by some closures, and that would be nice. But if we don't, then, you know, we still have the money to spend. But what that does is, of necessity, it means that there are going to be lowered expectations of the effects and the impact that you're going to see on 5 schools versus the impact that you might see on 3, right?
I agree.
So my question is, and it's to everybody really, are you prepared for that? Do you think our parents are prepared for that? They voted for a lot of money, and they expect to see a noticeable difference. And that difference is going to be less noticeable if the money is spread over more facilities than if it's not.
They voted for a lot of money without the inherent understanding, I would contend, that it wasn't nearly enough money for the facilities that we have.
They voted for the money, not saying residents of Miners Oaks thought that they were voting to improve their school at Miners Oaks.
Oh yeah, no, I heard that.
Everybody had the impression that that amount of money was going to make pristine my kid's school, whichever one that happened to be.
I have a question. Do you think, I'm sorry, did you say you thought parents thought that?
I think parents thought that.
Well, I
They
wouldn't
voted
say
Measure
anyone
J.
thought it would be pristine. I think everyone, I voted for it thinking that it was going to have an impact on all the schools and bring them up to a certain level
To a
bar.
certain level, yes.
I
Right.
think that the school district can do an excellent job, as they've done in the past, in communicating. This was Plan C. Was it Plan C or Plan
C.
D? Plan C.
Yeah.
100 million, 55 million, 35 million. And that was, you know, a very measured, Hank's final decision, and based on many, many studies of what the market would bear. And I think if we do a great job communicating that to the public, they're behind. They sent their message loud and clear. They're most concerned about closing a school, and after that, perhaps, how much money is my school going to get? In fact, Mrs. Mendoza, I don't know if she's still here.
He was here a long time.
She mentioned that she and the other staff felt they had been overlooked in a bond that was 2002, was that 2000-ish?
97.
97. They felt that their school site had been overlooked.
Or they ran out of money when they got there.
Yeah, and she said, you know, if you close the school now, after we've been waiting all this time for Measure J funds, and that's when I realized this can't be about Measure J funds. It has to be about, you know, first, again, the public spoke very loud and clear, first about keep our school open because this is our community. And then let's talk about Measure J.
Well, Measure J funds also played very significantly in Gabby's decision-making. For instance, our first vote was to remove the students from Miners Oaks School and move a bunch of other stuff. So that didn't save any Measure J funds because we were still putting them in. So there was no savings. So Gabby said, well, if there are no savings, then I'm out, right? Because that's what I thought we were doing. And then Glenn brought up the excellent point that there were $2 million, more than $2 million slated for this facility. So.
District property.
The district property.
This district office property. So that was very important in terms of, I think, the resolution to move forward on deciding what you're going to do before that $2 million gets spent a certain way.
I do think, Michael, that Hank was very clear before the Measure J vote that this was not going to be sexy new science
I got that
building,
message.
right? So, but I think that was a bonus, and this is just my opinion that we didn't looking at schools if you're closing a school, the Measure J funds is a bonus, but it's not a reason to close a
Yeah, I
school.
think
And there was a
excellent
real.
point. It shouldn't be a reason.
There was a real political problem in that all of the ways that Measure J was sold were through Save Our Schools, which was almost identical to the bumper sticker that we had in 2008, which was about saving schools from being closed. So people came to those public meetings saying, hey, I voted for that, and now to save our schools, which was the bumper sticker, and now you're telling me that you're going to close my schools for Measure J. So that was a real political issue that I think could have some negative ramifications down the road for the school district if it wants to raise money again for its facilities.
And that's my concern, because clearly this is not enough. And I have to go back to what Steve said. I mean, initially you approach this as a purely economic decision, right? But the more you start talking about this, the more you realize it's not just an economic decision. It has to have more in it, because, you know, we're struggling with this in the community college district, right? You either lower your expenses or you raise revenue, or both. And both are different, right? And so for us to automatically assume that the solution is to close a school and save money without the counterbalancing increase in revenue considerations would be a one-sided conversation, which is what I appreciate that came out of this committee. So in one sense, it's like, okay, I hear where we're going. But in another sense, personally, I'm like, okay, all these schools, they're on probation. You either make yourselves viable or we'll come back, right? Because this is the thing that bothered me, is I saw an extraordinary amount of participation over this, and I was so proud and so pleased, but I didn't see it before, and I'm afraid I won't see it after, unless every school is on the block continuously. Prove yourself, stay involved, stay with us, or we will come back. Because you can't just say, do this and walk away. Right? That's not good enough. So my other question, and I guess I don't even know how to answer it, is how do we maintain these strategic connections between all of our schools, because it's one district? And I'll say this, you know, when Miners Oaks was on the block, saw a lot of parents from Miners Oaks, but that's a district-wide impact, and I didn't see enough parents from other parts of the district, because obviously my inference is that a lot of other folks were saying, well, that's not my problem.
A lot of San Antonio parents.
One
because San Antonio was on the block.
Only one ox was being gored.
Right.
So every month we need a new headline.
You know what, I do have a suggestion. I don't know, this is just a suggestion, but you might want to consider making a committee that's sort of
What she said.
a representation, has a representative from each school that would then meet and kind of, I would be willing to continue personally some kind of work like this that would
And I
do
would be
exactly
willing
what
to
you
hear
said.
this, because I think it's what we need.
Yeah.
They said it earlier.
I'm sorry, but a committee for what?
We did give you the cake
For
already,
the
so.
idea. Not 7-Eleven, no, but the idea
Strategic
that
planning.
you'd have a representative from each
Yes.
school get together monthly maybe, and continue that conversation, continue the conversation of how to grow, how to stay viable, how to address academic growth, how to, what if you had a
Parent
person from
involvement.
each- Yeah, parent involvement, and we
Well,
would meet,
district-wide.
and then we would meet with you guys, is what
I
I'm
see
saying.
the
like we would-
vehicle that you're talking about being the LCAP process, that I think could really be the local.
Control and
Control and
accountability.
accountability program, which is just for that very purpose.
How about the possibilities committee? No, seriously, I was thinking that when you said, basically our work is not done here. And I've been thinking that for the last 2 weeks. I mean, I have been figuring out ideas and trying to get, but you're right. The word I was looking to utilize was motivate and utilize the momentum that's been created here. And Michael, maybe it is that, you know, Andy said it very well. I don't believe now is the right time to close all the schools. And I think you said something like revisiting it in 2 to 3 years, I think was your original opinion. And I think that will be enough impetus if we can put a committee together that is tasked with raising the bar. I think that's a great idea. And I hear you guys basically saying the same thing. And I'd be willing to, you guys are probably tired of me, but I'd be willing to be part of that as well.
I'm writing all your names down.
Well, I think we have a vehicle, like I said, which is LCAP, but I have a little bit of an issue with the premise that we came at it from economically. I mean, my takeaway economically was that we have far more opportunities to enhance our revenue through keeping our schools open than we ever would realize from.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that became abundantly clear as this conversation evolved. The other question that I want to ask, and it's
Can I address your question though about keeping the momentum going, particularly with Miners Oaks? I mean, we were unanimous that you should vote to remove or make it happen to take out the 4 poor portables at Miners Oaks, and that you have funding to do that. You have a unanimous decision from us recommending that you do that. And I would encourage you to do that as soon as possible. And then you will build on the momentum that has been built at Miners Oaks, because this group has been brought together by the actions of this committee. And it would be wonderful to see something happen. And so, the idea of removing those portables, which are adjacent to the garden area, then you open up outdoor classroom area. And the planning for that, children involved in that, the imagination involved in that, that is something that you can do that doesn't cost very much money, that is going to show the community that you have belief in the viability of that school. And that is a way to create excitement and keep that momentum going. When people see something happening and opening up a new space for development of new styles of education, that's going to be exciting. That's going to keep that momentum going. So, sorry to...
Well, actually, no, that's perfect lead into my next question. And this is more to the principals and the instructors in the audience, because I like this idea of resilient schools. It sounds like contextualized education. It almost sounds like Common Core. But my question to the instruction staff is this practical? I know everybody right now is working on developing Common Core curriculum, and it's beating the out of you. And this is another more sophisticated level of that, it seems to me. And much as I like the sound of it, is it a big bite? Is it a little bite? Is it just right? Is it something that can be done?
You're asking that question, can Miners Oaks be made an environmental?
Right? I mean, I know that we're struggling to build a Common Core curriculum.
Outdoor teaching.
This is another new curriculum.
Well, that's the thing, is it's not new. It's what we're already doing. Food for Thought's been doing this in all the school districts since 2002. Once Upon a Watershed has been going since 2005. And I think that one of the most important things about framing resilient schools is to recognize what is already happening. And it's already happening, particularly at Miners Oaks, just because that's the one that has the most mature programs. So it's not creating something new. And so the Common Core, the connections with curriculum are already established by outside agencies. We're doing this.
Are we also talking about somehow bolstering? I mean, I wanted to use the term magnet school at Miners Oaks.
Absolutely.
A magnet school in the environment. But so what are we suggesting that we can do to bolster build upon what is already happening at Miners Oaks, so that we can attract more students back to that campus, for example?
Well, that's what magnet schools do, is that they're set up to bring students together to avoid having segregation.
So is that your question, Michael? Is it possible for us to have a magnet school for the environment at Miners Oaks?
Magnet, I don't know. That's
no one wants to use that word.
But okay, but see, that actually adds to my question, because if we're already doing this, and we still have these challenges in front of us, then we have to do more. And so my question is, can you, the staff, take on more?
But what's
I
the...
have a couple comments.
Sorry.
One of the comments made earlier is that we need to build on momentum. There's a lot of good energy that is emanating from these meetings. But there's also a lot of that energy that continues every single day through our PTO and the activities that take place on our school campus already. And you guys just don't see that on a daily basis. But yes, the ideas that came forward are expanding, and they're of value within our current program, and they complement it and enrich it. For example, at San Antonio, we had a changeover in the ranch next door. In the past couple of years, it changed hands, so it's going from a strictly citrus orange grove that was benefiting Suncrest into now more of a sustainable farming effort. And the people who now own that ranch have collaborated with David and I. We are putting in a gate that will allow the kids to go back and forth. We're trying to model the Cocoa Farm type of relationship. And so, yes, it is expanding, it's growing. And I do want to say, though, there is so much good energy on each of our campuses, especially with our teacher body, that was concentrated in the meetings that we had in Chaparral here a couple weeks ago. So I'm glad we got to see that on a public venue, but it does take place already, it's there. And so to expand in these great programs like David has going, we want to go that direction, because I think it's so valuable for our kids.
I wanted to say with that, like with David's program, my program has been taught in the schools here since 2003. And it is an intervention program, by the way. I don't think I ever mentioned that, because it particularly, you see the kids doing the program and you see who needs extra care or who's doing something differently. And it does raise the reading skills and the math skills, because it's an advanced program. So kids are doing something in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade that they probably wouldn't do until they were in college. With my program, they learn playwriting. Most teachers in their teacher training are not taught playwriting skills. So it's a program that is set for the teachers to be taught to teach the programs in school. And so I wanted to say earlier too, as far as the downward turn in schools and the grades, I think the canary in the coal mine were the arts, were the first to go, the first to drop off. They still haven't been brought back as much as they were in the schools. So with that, you don't have as higher grade levels as you did, particularly in high school. There are a lot of programs that did not survive that economic downturn that were particularly beneficial to grades and teacher student achievement. So getting back to partnerships, community partnerships with the programs that are here and are especially geared towards these schools, and working, each school finding, their art mentor or their environmental education mentor, but each school should have some sort of nonprofit working there, looking for grant funding, sharing whatever's going on there with the other campuses. There's so many, there could be 5 magnet schools of different things, really.
Can we let Steve finish his thoughts and then we'll take one? Yeah.
There's one other major point I wanted to make, and I'm sure that all the members of the board are aware of the concept. It may be that not all the folks in the audience or those watching the broadcast are aware of. In my aerospace and IT business, we always called it colors of money. And certain types of funds you can spend on certain things and not on other. So what we have in Measure J, I'll refer in shorthand to as capital funds. They're things that's money that we can use to fix up the facilities. It's not money that we can use to give the teachers a raise. It's not money that we can use to hire additional maintenance staff. David's Resilient Schools program, which I think the entire committee was enthusiastic about, is, if you will, a third color of money. It can be spent for, again, shorthand, what we might call enrichment of the educational experience for the kids. But it's not money, unless the grant specifically allows it, it's not money that will give us an edge in retaining and recruiting good teachers. Measure J will not help us, however we disperse the funds, will not help us retain and recruit good teachers. The committee recommended, as you know, elimination of 8 individual classrooms across the district, elementary schools. That will have the effect of a drop in the bucket of helping the district come to terms with the financial need of retaining and recruiting the best teachers. And that remains a serious flaw in the entire plan from my point of view. And that's what leaves you all with some very hard decisions to make.
May I segue from that into?
Yes, because you've been holding your breath.
That's okay.
So it's your turn. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I begin by just saying, I echo Steve's comments and the report that he's made in his personal statement. I am one of the lone ones as well. I came to this committee with a variety of backgrounds. I have a business background, a legal background. I have formed and funded and run a number of nonprofits. Some still exist today after many, many years. Been involved in education. I'm married to a teacher and recently been married to the union president. That's brought a whole
Same
new
person.
level.
I was just gonna say, wow.
You said you wouldn't point
Same
that out. This is embarrassing.
Another headline.
I'm just trying to keep all the interest up.
I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, so I come with all these various situations. I also come from a person who worked for almost a year full-time to put together a program for this district, along the lines of what David has done, and was supported by the school board, not by the state, however, after numerous attempts. So some idea what goes into that. I'm not going to try to repeat what's there, but also what I come with my own understanding of where I think we are heading as a larger society, and then we're a subset of that. So I see where we're heading is right now we're scraping by, and that's a harsh word, but it's true. We have Measure J money. It's not enough by any measure, no pun intended. We have more facilities than we need, and there's a potential there. I want to bring into the concept in this of I support the Resilient School Program, and like I've said in my report, I think it needs to go much deeper than this, because we're going to need the kind of resilience that we have never even imagined before. And I think schools have a big role to play in that. But there's nothing about these programs that have any realistic promise that we can plan on to bring about the millions of dollars just to get up to where we are, or where we should be, and then continue to maintain. I also respectfully disagree with David. That is not the question of a $10 million grant versus closing a school. That's apples and oranges in my mind, along the lines that Steve has pointed out. It's the color of money in some ways. Nothing about that is going to create the opportunity to give teachers even a marginal raise. And from what I understand going on, that there's very little chance that that's going to happen in the coming years. So when you look at money that can be saved by closing the 2 schools that I recommended, or 2 schools, whichever ones they are, the savings that comes out of that has 2 effects. One, it can give the teachers a raise, which is better than no raise. When you're at the bottom of the barrel, that's really important. And number 2, some of that money should be used to fund the key drivers on key development ideas for this district, because it takes a lot of work, and I listen to what Kevin said. So what I would look at is introduce the concept of marginal return. So you can't look at it as 1% or 2% of the school budget. What you're looking at is it has a huge effect on the teachers by giving them a raise, and also drives some key developments that have to happen in the larger plan to increase revenue while you're reducing costs. The other thing that's a danger of grants, having been in the nonprofit world and to some extent involved with government grants, is you can't run a business with grants. The nonprofit world and the government world is littered with programs that got grants, got built up, and got abandoned. The funding does not stop. And infrastructure grants create ongoing expenses long after that grant is gone. So you have to think very carefully. And I support the grant work that David and his group is doing. I support every idea I've heard of revenue enhancement and educational enrichment. And I have personally put my own effort there, and I will continue to put my effort there. I have my own ideas ranging from the small to the outrageous. So, but I think you have to think about the fact that I see the long-term picture. If we're scraping by now, I don't see it getting better. In fact, I see it getting worse. And while you talk about talk about enrichment programs in the community, I think integration with the community is key. We're going to need that in every sector of society. In every community, in every place we're going to need to do that. Or it's all hands on deck. But using a sailing term, you can't chart an ambitious course if you're manning the pumps desperately down below to keep the water, keep the hull above water. So ultimately, it's not just economics, but economics is going to drive a decline in infrastructure and teachers' retention and recruitment that ultimately will affect the quality of education. That's my view. So while we're talking about revenue enhancement, that gets us away from the fact that we have more physical facilities than we need, and we need to start concentrating. In fact, the connection I see in this is that monies brought in revenue enhancement that are concentrated on fewer sites have greater effects. Again, a better marginal return. You spread it out, that necessarily gets dissipated. So I think that we are faced with, to some of my less than optimistic viewpoint down the road. So I would say that yes, echoing Andy's report, there is a certain degree of wait and see, but I would counsel against that. I think some of what I said is immediate and some of it's anticipatory. But I think there is an important power to taking action. And this thing has been kicked down the road for years. And it's time to stop doing that. It's time to make changes. And changes begat changes. I've heard so much about how we don't like the status quo. What I really hear are arguments to maintain the status quo. That fails to motivate me in the idea that we can somehow solve these problems now and in the future. So I think that this is just the beginning. And I agree with everybody. Just to close a school, just to do it and save a few dollars and do nothing else, it's not a good idea. But as part of a larger plan that is going to ultimately restructure the way these things are run and anticipate those changes and help guide those changes, I think is key to our survival. And I love all these programs, but we got to start by righting the ship. And we start by taking and hitting those costs that are now here and ongoing. Down the road, we start cutting those. If you want to if you want to have grants enhance your program, the underlying thing, if it's a going concern, which this district is, if you want grants to help that, you have to have the going concern taken care of. The grants cannot be funded for that. It's death if you do that. So that's my point. I don't want to repeat what's in my paper too much, and I'm happy to elaborate on those ideas, but I am with the minority that I think the closure of at least 2 schools is a priority. It doesn't have to be all one in 1 year, one and then the other. The other idea of making space to move these operations fully, I don't know how we're going to move the operations fully off of here and maintain all 5 schools with students. I don't see how that's going to happen, but maybe it can. But you still do not have the savings that are having huge marginal benefit to this district. And then the other thing, of course, is the driver on this piece of property to develop is going to take a lot of work. It's a complex endeavor. It's beyond the purview of a school board to do that in terms of that time commitment. You guys already put a ton of time in. It's going to take a partnership to do it of numerous stakeholders, of individuals, government, district, and organizations to do this, and that needs to be driven, and that kind of effort needs to have some kind of funding behind it to support it, because the burnout rates is too great. And I speak from personal experience. It only took me 20 years of that kind of effort to burn out, long after my finances were destroyed. So the point being is that it's a lot of work to do this, but I think you are sitting on something that is the beginning of a plan of revenue building and taking care of the future in a big way, all the while supporting these ideas, which are wonderful. But they're not, it's apples and oranges in my mind.
Okay.
Chris, obviously you're not passionate at all about your ideas, but
I'm ready to fall asleep. I don't know what it is.
well said. The thing you ended with was talked about the revenue side, but everything you were talking about seemed to be associated with the cost side. So on what basis do you see closing schools as enhancing revenue?
Well, for example, you no longer, if you don't have the cost of maintaining and repairing San Antonio, for example, and you lease it to a school, to an operation that doesn't detract from the student population of this district, like Valley Oak, then you have someone putting money into the facility which you own, capitalizing their own cost over a long-term lease, and that can become a net revenue generator instead of an outgoing cost.
At least an offset to Measure J funds that you would have spent.
Right. And those funds can be levered elsewhere on the thing. Here in this place, obviously the idea of affordable housing ought to end up being a revenue generator. Not only a service and a benefit and an attraction to teachers and staff, but also a revenue generator through the partnership. There's no reason why that could, I don't see why that could not be structured. So, and that's where grants and things can make a huge difference in, not the kind of grant we're thinking about, an education grant, but grants that allow you to take care of a problem like that you can do with partnerships with the city and other people to bring money in to do it that you're not paying back on as part of your investment. So.
And recognizing, I think, your statements that, affordable housing is 8 years away from producing any revenue at the minimum.
Yes.
Right.
So. Right. And you look at ways of how you want to do that, right? This site also has the potential of being in the center of town. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Pattern Language set of books.
Christopher Alexander.
Yeah, Berkeley. They, at some point, I'd love to have a discussion over a few beers about this, but the...
Let's go.
Meeting adjourned.
OEC closes pretty soon around. But there's ways of putting things together in terms of architecture and organization on the ground level that resonates with people according to this book and attracts people. So you're sitting in the center of town with this piece of property, so that affordable housing is just the core development of that. Now, you could also do other educational things here that themselves could be revenue generators, such as, I have some ideas on how that would happen as well. You could also have businesses here that integrate well into that. You could also basically make the school property become the center of the community, not just in revenue generations, but in the spirit of that community, which drives a lot of this stuff. So those are ideas that need to be explored, but you are sitting on a valuable asset here that needs to be thoughtfully and aggressively pursued. Because I don't think there's a lot of time. If we're facing a projected $1 million deficit in 2 years, the clock is ticking, people. So, and if we're not in a hole, and I say we're in a hole because we have a deficit of infrastructure improvements that need to be made that are not going to be funded by Measure J. We have teachers at the bottom of the rung, and the gap is widening through the way the schools are funded. Then, it's going to take extraordinary measures to pull out of that hole. We're not up to where, hey, everything's great, and if it just stays the way it is, we're all cool. It's not happening that way. We're actually suffering all kinds of declines everywhere that we see in infrastructure and things like this. So it's pretty apparent if you just take a walk and look at everything. So I'm trying to not be pessimistic and defeat people. I'm trying to say that it's all hands on deck in every area, and we better get innovative and we better get smart really fast, because I think that the district is going to have a less than positive future if we don't.
And Jane, you said, this could be 8 years before we develop this property.
Yeah, thanks for turning.
To me, that's an argument for getting moving on it right away, because it's going to take 8 years. If 8 years is the correct time frame, it's going to take 8 years if we start now, or if we start 2 years from now, then it's 10 years. And so, the need is evident. And Michael, you said earlier, you were asking, do we have the wherewithal to do this? And I think you were talking about that environmental concept. But the point is, what step can we take right now toward anything that helps us, improve the product that we give to our kids? Is it removing the classrooms as a start? And then, maybe that's a simple, small thing that we can do this summer and have that space available for outdoor education in the fall.
Excellent.
Just one small, single step. Because otherwise what happens is the report gets, it's too big and it's too much and it's going to take too long. And it gets put on the shelf and collects dust and we don't do anything.
That's a great point, bite-sized pieces. Look at, for example, when we bought our house a year ago, it was a lesser house than we wanted. It was a fixer-upper. And it would have been daunting, but I said to my husband, one small project a month, one small project a month. And maybe that's something that the school board can look at. Out of all these ideas, what can we implement this summer to show credibility towards where the direction we're going? And, what can we implement during the next school year, et cetera? Maybe those are the programs. It's not maybe construction on site, but maybe it's the programs. And expanding what Teresa brought up with, that's so cool that that's happening now. Your neighbor is providing a sustainable garden basically for you guys to walk in, and you're not having to invest any time or energy or money into it. That, that just goes to show the potential for this community. But and maybe that's the direction we need to go, is in bite-sized pieces. And I would say to what Chris is saying, I think the committee felt strongly mostly about look at this property first. If you're gonna look anywhere, look here first, because this is what the previous 7-Eleven committee recommended. We came up with the same suggestion. Is that can gonna be kicked down the road? We hope not. We hope that the previous 7-Eleven committee and the time we invested, you're gonna take an honest, serious look at, even if it does take 8 years to develop, what can we start today?
Just to be clear, as an endpoint, the can wasn't kicked down the road after 2012. And I wrote you all a fairly detailed description of what happened, and just think back on what the real estate market was like in 2012, 13, and 14.
Good point.
It absolutely wasn't kicked down the road. In fact, I can tell you now, and I wasn't smart enough then to know what I know now, but if we had acted 3 or 4 years ago and sold this property, we would have gotten 60 cents on the dollar for something we might now be able to get $1.20 on the dollar. Okay? So, I wasn't prescient, and I'm not saying that I knew that. I'm just saying now we have a whole host of opportunities that we never would have had in 2013, including an entirely different perspective from the city. I mean, I had conversations with them in affordable housing in 2012? Really? No way. It was not going to happen. Kicking and screaming, even to talk about it. Now, after some initiatives on the part of a great committee with whom I've met several times, I think, and a different council, right? They're now coming to that point. And I also have to tell you that I wouldn't want anybody to infer that it is probable, likely, close to certain, or whatever, that when all of this is developed, that it's going to be predominantly affordable housing. Okay? It might, some might not, but I've had conversations over the last 4 or 5 years with people who have at least 5 different interpretations of what this place could be, right?
Well, let me add also, when I mentioned affordable housing, I don't see that being anything more than a part of this property.
Exactly.
Right, it's just a part of the development. But I think it's also key that the district, I would not advocate selling this property.
No, well, the board's already made that decision.
Right, and I wouldn't advocate just trying to find like a big lead tenant. I'm talking about developing it in partnership where the school district maintains ownership and some control and some profit participation over the long term. That's what I'm referring to.
But you know, Chris, that in anywhere, whether it's Ojai or places around the nation, that the biggest revenue generation when you have school property and you then don't have school property, by far the biggest revenue generation is to sell it to one developer. That's how you get the money. When you start piecemealing it out and you have certain people with different kinds of revenues or lack thereof, you do not create anywhere close to the optimal revenue source. That may not be the reason why you sell it or release it or whatever, okay? But 6 different or 7 different people participating, some of whom are scratching their own nickels together, that's not how you get a lot of money.
But a mixed development can be driven by one developer.
It can.
Right. There are models out there of where there is basically, you know, you put up in essence a special purpose vehicle and do it, and there's a buyback, or whatever the situation is. That all has to be explored.
I know, exactly.
But the point is that it has to be, in my mind, you have to use the word Kevin used, you have to drive that process.
And all I'm saying is, we are in such a better position in 2016 than at any point after March of 2012.
Right.
Okay, so I'm really
And
optimistic.
I wouldn't have made this argument if 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, absolutely.
Because it was nothing moving.
Okay.
And also, we were in a crisis, more so than we are now.
Okay.
So, and I don't, despite my loud grating voice, you know, I don't, and what appears to be gloom and doom, I think the opportunity is actually, they're expanding. You just have to take a different perspective on what you see as how we ought to move forward. And to think that you're going to get bailed out through these other programs when you have these huge, I mean, millions of dollars of cost, then you can't do that. It has to come a different way in combination with those other things. And so that's my main point. And to sit back and think we can generate enrichment programs that are going to solve that problem, I think we're being unrealistic to do that. Even though I fully support those programs, and they're all important. They're all an important mix. If we're not doing a good job and not teaching what we need to teach and doing a good job, then there's no point in the district. So all those things are important, but the kind of backlog we're talking about here, and then the ongoing deterioration of infrastructure going on in the future, that's a problem that takes a radically new approach if we're going to successfully address it. And that's full of risk, you know, but, you know, and angst and division and experimentation and all these things that's so hard to do, you don't have no money to do it with. But it's going to be, to me, the effort is worth it because you have an enhanced chance of a better outcome than if you try to maintain business as usual. I think the outcome is going to be pretty much set. And exactly how it manifests itself,
Chris, I'm going to cut you off for a minute because I think I'm kind of wondering where we go from here.
Well, I think we have our marching orders, definitely. We have to, you know, you guys have given us the task to really examine everything up one side and down the other, and look into the possibilities of partnerships, look into expanding attendance, increasing, you know, the enrollment in our, you know, just increasing enrollment in a variety of ways, increasing income to the district. I think we have a lot to do, and hopefully we'll have some help from, I know we'll have help from our administrators at the various schools. We have fabulous administrators, we have fabulous teachers, and I have nothing but the highest confidence in their ability to help us with this, because we're, you know, obviously we're here and we receive information, we evaluate it, and then it's our job to make sure we have the best possible school district we can have with the funds that we have, because we have to keep the balanced budget.
The technical answer, you know, to Jane's question is the next thing that happens is there's an agenda item on April 19th where the board will then have a chance, board members have a lot of back and forth tonight, but you'll then have 5 days to sort of reflect, right? And there'll be time for each of you to reflect and ask questions, because I'm sure there'll be more things that you'll want to know about. And in that agenda item, we will also be talking about some future meetings, special meetings, at some point in time or points in time. So that's what happens next.
Well, apropos of that, I unfortunately have to be in Korea next week, so I won't be here. So I'd like to take advantage of you guys being here if I can, just to ask you, you know, kind of give you a sense of what one of the things I think, and see what your opinion about it is, which is that, you know, I thought a lot about Measure J and how it was marketed. And I also thought about the fact that Measure J represents $35 million, and there are a number of school districts with substantially more than that, that they've been able to achieve through multiple bond offerings. $35 million, 1% of that is $350,000. So every single year for 100 years, we could spend $350 or $350,000 with Measure J money. it seems to me that it is just not a viable approach after having marketed and sold and advocated Measure J to say now, although I agree with Michael that this is in some senses driven by the idea, do we want to put money into schools that aren't going to continue to exist? It doesn't seem reasonable to me in this community to turn around and close a school after we raised money on the basis that we did under Measure J. And furthermore, you guys collectively never, in your deliberations, seem to suggest that any of those schools would come offline. You never said that school, even if it came offline as a school, should be repurposed as, just sell it or knock it down so that it's no longer a burden to the school district. So realistically, if we're moving things around, reconfiguring, we're still going to have to maintain some semblance of a quality infrastructure at every school. And that seemed to be the collective result of your deliberations. So given that, I find it hard to imagine now closing a school, notwithstanding very passionate and honestly, successful words, Chris and Steve, about your ideas for why, and Merv too, potentially closing a school for purposes of, it seemed to me, revenue primarily. And I understand there's a broad question also about the quality of the education we offer. But so I also have concerns about the customer part of this whole thing. We as a school district, everything we say in terms of revenue is about how many students we'll have. And so I worry that we will, if we were to close a school right now, we will lose the support of our customers in a meaningful way. And I don't know, how that would affect our overall net enrollment, but if it affected it meaningfully, it would be a disaster.
That was one of my greatest concerns. In fact, we talked about this we deliberated many times on this. We will lose families. We deliberated about this, and then we heard at the public comment night, 2 nights, we heard several people come up and say, I live in Oakview, if you guys close Miners Oaks, we're out of here. We heard that families would leave our district.
But people say a lot of things as support for you. I'll vote some way, but when it comes down to a choice, I have as a parent said, I will never send my, I'll make something up, I'll never send my child to that ballet class. And I was like, oh, my mom, my ballet, my friend's going, I was like, all right, I send them to ballet class, right? So you'll say things that you totally believe as a parent, but then when you're I'll never pay for private school, or I'll never do this. And then as a parent, when you are actually faced with that decision, you make a choice that you said you never would do.
Look at the situation where people said, if I can't walk to school, right, or I can't drive the 1 block or 2 blocks, whatever it is, to school, we're out of here, right?
Well,
so let me get this straight. So you're out of here. Now you won't go 1 mile to another site?
But it wasn't that.
What, are you going to now drive to Ventura?
But Chris,
Come on now.
No, it wasn't that at all. No, more Sunset.
Well, I heard a lot of that.
It wasn't that at all. It was that, and I really recommend, because we went to Miners Oaks, I really recommend that if the school board's going to make any decisions about closing, especially that school, you park at Andy's Liquors. Inside joke. And then you walk, and the families, it's the coolest thing. It is like this cultural thing where the moms have their kids in the stroller, and the kids are walking a little bit ahead of them, and they're talking, and that's their cultural. One lady had us crying because she said, you're closing my family. It's not a school, it's a family. So I think there is much to be said toward the fact that this would be more of a cultural leaning, and I can't second guess somebody. If they tell me they're going to do something and I've been fearing it and we've been dialoguing about it, and then there's confirmation of that, I'm not going to second guess that she's
But, on the flip side of that, we had Marianne pulled 31 out of the 38 families that said they would leave Summit if you close Summit. The options for people in Upper Ojai, you could go, are they going to choose Santa Paula High School over Nordhoff? Maybe. Are they going to but I don't know. That's not, those are apples and oranges right there. Are they gonna choose Isabel, the middle school, over Matilaha? Those are two totally different schools. If they're coming to Summit, they're probably going to Matilaha, and they're probably going to Nordhoff. But just because of that, I don't see a huge flight from Upper Ojai. And I could, but that's just,
Right, I'm not saying that I believe we should close a school, I'm just saying that argument alone doesn't
Flight from Upper.
Well,
quite
don't
carry the weight.
don't forget how many private schools we have here, and I do think it's important, I just think it's very important to consider who your customer is. I think that that's an excellent point. You do have to take that into consideration. You can make these arguments, these financial and these monetary arguments, we need to generate income, we need to do these things. But you cannot forget who you're marketing yourself to. You just have to remember that. And it's parents and children, and it's not simple. It's not just simple, it's not just test scores. I don't send any of my kids to a school based on test scores or any of that. It's very, very personal. This is our customer. It's a personal choice.
But what if
and
we
when
get
you
a-
start forcing it, you're going to lose people. You are.
And I think the goal is to improve the product to the customer.
Yes.
And so the question is, the question is, how can we improve the product that we're currently providing the customer? All perception aside, I heard a lot of arguments in favor of consolidation as a way to improve the product to the customer.
I think
Well, and I want to hear that more because what I've heard are sort of very broad statements like if you have 3 classes in every school, that's ideal. And I've heard broad ideas about, well, overall, it's better to have more collaboration and stuff like that. But I also hear on the flip side legitimate questions of like, how long is my kid going to have to wait to play dodgeball or use the equipment? Do we have enough equipment? Are we really set up to serve lunch to that many more kids? Now that you've displaced the people at whatever school and they're being transported somewhere else, what's their actual experience going to be like? Is that going to be a good experience, a net better experience? Can we assure that? I don't know the answers to those things.
I think you're oversimplifying if you just say, okay, if we collaboration and we have 4 classes and the teachers can work together. That to me is a very oversimplification of what it means to send your child to school and how they operate there every day on a given basis, on the playground, interpersonal relationships, relationships with the staff. All of that comes into play. It's a very personal thing. And I just would...
The staff is going to move with the children.
Well, but that doesn't mean...
Some of the staff, hopefully we'll get some economies of scale, right?
It doesn't
We were told by closure resulted in no layoffs.
No, but my point is a little bit different.
No certificate layoffs.
No certificate layoffs.
Well,
And minor
teachers.
class.
And I would like to
Right.
just make one suggestion, which is just a suggestion, but I would recommend that you guys not try to reinvent the wheel, that you have tons of information. We have the benefit of these 2 public hearings. You have incredible information that Andy has provided. You have all of this professional expert staff that you can ask these questions of. But I wouldn't belabor this for the 6 months that we've gone over this. I would really assess what this is, and I would make a decision, and then I would go forward with it. I would hate for you guys to have hearing after hearing after hearing when we've done that, when that was our purpose, was to collect the information for you. Of course, it's up to you entirely, but I really hope that this is not an elongated period of time for you
I
to
think
make a decision.
that's a really good point, and I think that, we've heard, you guys have given us so much of your time. I don't want to take up any more of your evening, and I think we know what our job is now, and next week we will discuss, our perceptions and things like that when we have our next board meeting. So I would like to ask that our meeting be adjourned, because I think we are...
I will move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, none opposed. So we thank you. I want to give you guys a standing ovation.
Absolutely.